Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. My father was a pastor at the local church in Wales. Being a pastor, he had so many responsibilities, but he was alone, and his first wife left him early when he couldn't just give them the time he wanted to, and it was very difficult in the beginning to deal with it. But as the time went by, we got more and more separated from everything. He was getting alone, and then he decided to not be that anymore, and he wanted to get married again, but to find a girl of the appropriate age for him was a task. But just in time, there was a person, a stranger that moved into town a month ago and was very frequent to the Sunday sermons. Her name was Helen. I knew Helen from the first day that she moved in the town. She said she was a nomad and she barely stopped at a place. I met her in the local salon where she was working, and I told her about my father being the sermon and being one of the most respectable members in the society, and she was pretty impressed by it. We were quick to be friends after that. We would hang out together a lot, and that was when I told her everything about my family, and she was very keen on knowing all about us. Our relationship was a bit different, and people just wouldn't understand it, so we never disclosed it. She and I got very close, but then I stopped seeing her because that was the only appropriate thing to do. And then I found out that my father sent the marriage proposal to the woman, and weirdly that the woman accepted it, knowing the things between us. So I decided not to overthink it and roll with whatever was happening. They met, and things were decided between them, and the council worked out things where they decided the event of all the things, and he was to wed the woman in the same church. I was very skeptic of the woman, mostly because in all the days that I knew her, there was something about her that was distinct from the others, almost as if she did not know about her existence. She claimed to be a nomad, but all the places she talked about mostly sounded like Latin, and the places she talked about rarely existed. Just days before the wedding, she hesitated and asked my father if they can get married outside the church in the garden. She did not want to do that indoors, and something about being closer to God is to be with trees and rather the stones. I guess things like these really infatuated my father about her. One morning while I was sitting and trying to arrange the flowers, she came towards me and said, "I might going to be your new stepmother, but let us not forget that we are friends first and then everything else." And I agreed and smiled. I guess we both had mutual respect and trust between us, and that is the reason we'll synced well. And while my father was pretty happy that it wasn't an issue for me. The wedding happened, and it was a great event, and everyone was pretty excited and happy. And then around a month later, there were the bitter bickering between both of them that started, and I used to stay as far away as I can from their matter. She was getting weirder every day, and there was blacker than she was wearing, and would deny any sermon, saying that she is tired of hearing my father talk about God. We were just sitting having our evening tea when she told me, "He isn't that great, you know, the God." And I wondered what she was on about. And then she said to me, "I'm going to share a secret with you. When I said I'm a nomad, I meant in the realms. I roam from the realm of the living to the realm of the dead to the realm of the nothingness. And when I curse someone and kill them, they don't go to the realm of the dead. They go to the realm of nothingness. I am trying to build that realm, and I am going to be the queen, and you are going to be the king. When in the full moon I drench out the blood of your father, I shall marry you, and we shall drink the blood of your father to unionize, and then we cross over this realm and rule it together." I looked at her in worry and said, "Are you all right?" She was adamant on making me believe her, and I told her, "You don't want to visit the loony bin, do you?" She looked at me, grinding her teeth, and said, "Let me show you. I will stab myself and prove you that I am the nomad between the realms." And as she reached for the knife, I held her hand, stopped her, and said, "It's okay, I believe you." And then later she smiled, almost as if I had agreed with everything she had said. So I decided to tell my father everything, and told him that we should get her to a doctor of the mind to get her checked out. I decided to take her, and then there must have been a full noon night when I decided to take her with me, and I told her that we can start the sermon she wanted to and first buy some things. My father was right there. Her hairs were all covering her face and she was wearing everything black, and she started talking gibberish. And that is when she started charging my father with a knife, and then to take her down, just swished a punch that threw her off guard. I had to. I wasn't very proud of that, but I had to. She was unconscious, and then we took her to the mind doctor where he diagnosed her with personality disorder and said that it is better she stays there because the switches can be unpredictable and it can be dangerous for her. 3 days after we dropped her there, they told us that she killed herself by asphyxiating herself, and I wondered how she could have done that. I went there to get the body, and they said that it disappeared. I did not believe in them and wondered a foul play. I went back to tell my dad, who was broken by the news, only to find out that my dad was lying dead in his own pool of blood, and she was standing over the body, her black robe flaring in air, and she extended her hand and said, "Come, my king." It was the late 90s, and I was just out of the school, and I needed some extra money because I wanted to leave the place I was in, and the only way was to do that, get enough money and leave the town. I had saved enough to buy a car, and now I was waiting to get some more money to stably move to another state, and to do that, I had to do all kinds of jobs, and one of the jobs that I was definitely not interested in was babysitting. I have always had a no-go for babysitting. I found babysitting to be one of the jobs that I never really wanted to do. I made up my mind that babysitting is not going to be that one job that I will do. I was working to fulfill my goal, but there was no way I wanted to be a babysitter. I just never had the kind of attitude you need for the job, and I am not very good with children. So it can be the case why I did not like the job of babysitting. I was ready to leave the state for good, but I still had some gigs that I wanted to do to get that extra cash, but nothing was lined up for me, and I was getting desperate to leave the place. Then out of the blue, a gig came up that my friend told me about, and he said that it pays really well and is just right up by my alley. I asked him what the gig was, and he said, "It's some rich guy. He's going out of the country with his new model trophy wife of his, but there is the daughter. She's around 16 right now, and he's looking for a babysitter for her. I thought you can be good. You're 21 and you're responsible. He's not going to find a babysitter like you." And then I looked at him and said, "Why would you need a babysitter for a 16-year-old, man? She can take care of herself. I'm not interested." And then my friend continued, "The job pays $1,000 for a week. That is way too much. You can do the gig and then leave this place for good. It would take you weeks or maybe months otherwise." He was right, and I knew that I had to take the gig in order to rush the process of me leaving the States. And then I decided in the practicality of the situation that I will take the job and complete it. I decided to book an appointment, and then I left for the interview once it was scheduled. It was not one of those rich guy houses. It was extra rich house. There was everything made of quality that we didn't even know that exists. Everything was fine, and even the security was way tighter than even banks. And then the man came walking with a cigar in his hand and his model wife right beside him, and he said, "I know you might be wondering why I would hire a babysitter for a 16-year-old. You see, she's old now, but she doesn't have any friends, and while I go spend my honeymoon, it will be the right way to find her a friend. You look good enough, but if you harm her, you know your family will be dead before you." I looked at the man with stern conviction, and then I took up the job. Her name was Emily. I met Emily, and even she was weirded out by the whole babysitter thing, so I just told her, "Think of me as your friend or something." And then we hit it off very soon, and I spent my weeks. I could hang out with her a lot, and we would talk endlessly. And then as the week was about to end, she admitted that she liked, and I told her that I liked her too, and I told her that I would wait for her to turn 18. We were about to kiss when we heard the gunshots. It was the guards. They were dropping down dead, and there was nothing that I could do to dodge the guns. So I took Emily and hid her in the cabinets of the kitchen, and then tried apprehending the guys as I shouted, "I'm just the babysitter! I'm just the babysitter!" The man shouted, "Stop! It's just a boy!" And then the tallest man came out and said, "Tell him that we are done doing business with him. He interferes, he dies, and so his family." Turns out it wasn't the best of work that Emily's father did. It was the moment I held her hand when the men went away and asked her, "Do you want to run away with me?" And she said yes. And since then, we have been together, seeking adventures of our own. Emily's father tried coming after us, but it didn't go well for him. I've made some friends along the years that are not really fond of Emily's father, so we don't have to worry on that front. We just drive like nomads and live our life one adventure at a time. It's 2010, and we still haven't lost our sense of adventure, and neither we will.
This incident happened to me about 6 years ago when I was returning from my office. Back then, I was working as a bank manager in a government-based bank. I was happy with my job, and everything was going swimmingly until that day. One specific day, I had a heck of a lot of work to do, so I was working even after my office hours. That day, I worked till 10 p.m. until everything was finished. After that, I packed my stuff and left the office. I always preferred using public transport, so I went to the bus stop, which was near my office, and waited for the bus to arrive. I kept on waiting for a continuous half an hour, but no bus or other transport seemed to pass through that route since it was already 11 p.m. I thought maybe today I had to book a cab as I was already late, and I didn't want to be late anymore. I was booking a cab when I noticed the bus coming in front of me. I was happy since I was not expecting any public transport buses to come at this late hour. I kept my phone in my pocket and boarded the bus. I went in and sat on the last corner seat. I could see the conductor, but since I could book the ticket online, I didn't go to him and booked the ticket on my own. I was continuously looking at the conductor so that I could show him that I had booked the ticket, but he wasn't looking at me and was continuously looking in front. I had already booked the ticket, so I had no worries, so I sat there as I was exhausted from all the extra work. I closed my eyes, and within a minute, I fell asleep. I was tired, so I didn't notice that I slept for a continuous half an hour. When I woke up, I found my bus standing in an unknown area, totally covered with silence. Everyone in the bus was sitting silently, without saying anything. The weird thing was that they all were looking directly in front, including the conductor, and were not moving at all. I was alone there, moving my body, and looked shocked after seeing my bus standing at such a weird place. I wanted to go out, but the doors of the bus were closed and could only be opened by the driver. I stood up from my seat and went to the conductor to ask him why the bus was standing there and which area was that. I was sure that I had not been to this route before. I went to him and asked him about this, but he didn't listen to me. He kept on looking in front without moving. This was a little strange for me. Soon, I noticed that he was not even blinking his eyes. No human alive could do that for that much time. No, his silent posture was scaring me. I went back to my seat, but as soon as I turned back, I noticed a lady sitting beside me. Honestly, I didn't see her coming in and sitting beside me. I was terrified and was shaking. I just sat beside her and looked at her. She was also gazing in front, without moving, and like the conductor, even she was not blinking her eyes. I offered her a smile, but she didn't smile back. I was feeling uncomfortable in the bus, as no voice was there, no one was talking, even in the very dim light of the moving bus. He felt something sticky in the seat. I looked at my hand and found that my hand was all covered in blood. I screamed with fear, and I saw the lady was bleeding profusely. I was shocked that she was bleeding that much, and even then, she was sitting there so calmly and wasn't even reacting. She started to stare at me, and out of fear, I ran towards the conductor of the bus. I was looking at the lady and explaining the whole situation to the conductor, and I was surprised to death when I looked at his face. He was also bleeding heavily from his head. I jumped to the other seat in fear, and soon I found that everyone there was in the same condition. I started to think that I was in hell. Before I could say anything, the conductor told me, "Sir, don't worry about seeing our blood. We all are dead." That scene was the scariest of all. After this, I ran to the door and started pulling it to open it. Suddenly, the door opened and I was out of the bus. I started running on the road without thinking about the direction, but soon I was hit by an invisible thing and fainted. I don't know what happened after that, but when I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital. Later, I found out that a cop who was passing through that route found me in that condition and took me to the hospital. The cop came and asked me what I was doing there. I told him everything, but he thought that I was drunk or something and didn't believe me. He asked me to take care of myself and left from there. After that day, I didn't tell this incident to anyone because I knew that no one would believe me. But I can never forget that incident ever in my life.
The Nordic establishment that were by the riverside believed in the myth of the dragons. They believed that dragons existed, and it wasn't based on any evidence, but based on the texts and scrolls they found in the river one day. They were the first Nordic establishments to see the scrolls of the flying lizard. The fire was added later. This story is of the very first Nordic ruler that has no record of his existence in the history, Slok the Rebel. Slok rose to power and became the very first Nordic ruler, but he wasn't always the ruler. Everyone thought he was. Slok was a slave brought by a young landowner of the Luneta colony. He was tortured and raped in the Luneta camp by the Luneta men and women. His eyes looked as if they were the seas and their hairs like it was the darkest of the space, and brown skin that could defeat a tiger. He grew up in the Luneta colony, bought as a slave and molested. He first came to power when he slept with the wife of the Luneta chief, and then later beheaded the chief and married the wife. He, along with other Luneta, marched and fought the closest colony to him. After winning that war, he killed every Luneta soldier to get rid of his past and left the Luneta wife to the new army. Establishing his dominance in all the colonies, he married and bedded every single wife and woman of power he found, and later moved all the way to the shores of Nordania, where the sea met the sky and end of the earth was presumed. Bewildered in glory in his name, he set sail to the edge, and instead of felling, he found the Nordic land. There, a minute group of humans that looked white roamed freely naked, eloping like wild animals, and nothing but smiles and grins on their faces. Slok quickly established his greater kingdom in those parts and never returned to the Americania. One morning to celebrate this newfoundland, They gathered all the gifts he had been receiving in the celebration, and there, an uninvited guest, a vagabond out of sea, came in with the gift for the ruler. Slock was much curious about the gift and decided to look into it. And there, it was a drawing of a flying lizard. He was so excited about the drawing that he ordered the vagabond to set on the adventure with him to find this creature who looks like a lizard and can fly. He said, "Let us set course to find the creature." And the vagabond gladly accepted. As he was waiting for the offer, the man took the essential and left with only one goal: to find this creature with Slock. Slock was as furious a warrior as people have imagined him to be. There was no way he would accept defeat and get back and do nothing. He set on the course, trailing through the most difficult and icy trails a man can set course for, and he kept going on. And then, the most difficult turn that they had to do as they reached the final mark on the map. They realized there is nothing moving forward, and there was only one viable option, and that was to return. The vagabond showed the map and said, "This is the end, my king. The creature hides in the cave in this volcano, and there seems to be no way us mortals can bear the hot fury of earth." And he continued, "Not all adventures can come to fruition. We will tell the world, my king, that we were unable to find the creature." And then Slock answered with the most enthusiasm and grit, "We are not turning back. There is no way that I'm going to let a mere volcano come in my way of glory and looking at that beautiful creature with my own eye." And as he said that, he stripped all his clothes and jumped into the volcano. And as he jumped, the vagabond went back to said that Slock is no more. It was all a ruse by the vagabond. He was the eldest son of the chief of Uneta colony trying to seek revenge upon Slock. And then, as he did, he throned himself the king, for he was the one bearing the king's robe and crown. Meanwhile, everyone mourned Slock. Slock was alive in the corner of the volcano, trying to look for the creature for himself. And there, as he jumped over the edge to another cave-like window across, he saw in front of him a woman, naked and golden. And she approached Slock, and she asked, "What has brought you here, mortal?" And as she walked, Slock was mesmerized by her beauty, but was too smart to be blinded, and he replied, "In search of the truth." And the woman asked, "What is truth?" And he looked her in the eye and got closer to her and whispered, "That you are beautiful." And as he did, the woman in gold smiled and got closer, and they locked eyes with each other, and soon eloped. And as they both eloped, they turned into the dragons, and then in mere seconds back to the human form. And this all made him wonder everything. And then the golden woman revealed herself to be the dragon, and showcased the real power she holds. She chose Slock the first time she saw her while she was flying through the Uneta colony, and knew that he would be the one to rule the world not seen by the mortals, to be the Dragon King, and to be the one to make the House of Dragons bigger. Slock had to leave the earthly possessions, and he did, as he married the Dragon Queen. It is said they eloped for a century, and then had the young dragons. The House of Dragons still stands strong away from the mortal world, in a hidden world beneath the volcanoes. This story occurred during the 2017 Christmas holiday. I was living in a city about 700 miles away from where I grew up. Every year for the last 5, I'd return to my parents' home to celebrate the holidays with them. This year would be no different. My job at the time was to provide customer service for a global computer software company based in my state. 5 days a week, I spoke to customers, some furious and some clueless. The call that spawned this mess started like almost any other. The gentleman on the phone had a few questions regarding his warranty. I answered them as well as I could. Once or twice, there was a brief gap in the call as I waited for the computer to give me the information I needed. As you do during periods of silence, the caller began making small talk. I joined in, not thinking anything bad would become that. Over the course of the discussion, he made note of my accent and asked what state I was from. I answered, and it turned out that he lived in that state. Before I knew it, we were discussing our hometowns, and he turned out to live just a town over from the one I grew up in. The entire conversation seemed innocent. When he asked if I ever went back home, I said I did every Christmas. Nothing more was said after that. He thanked me for my help and hung up. The call was so ordinary that I'd forgotten about it by the end of my shift. A few weeks would pass, and I would take a flight back home to celebrate with my parents. The scary part of the story begins here. It was December 23rd, and I was helping my folks put up the tree. Doorbell rang, and when I opened the door, a man had been recognized on the porch. I kindly asked him if I could help. He looked at me puzzled and said something like, "Mike, come on, it's Daryl." These are not our actual names, of course. When I talked to you on the phone, we made plans to hang out. Honestly, I had no idea what this man was talking about. He reminded me, and the discussion slowly came back to me. I did remember some vague talk about us possibly getting together, but no vital information had been shared. I was trying to be nice with you to do strangers with common connections and never had any intention of meeting the guy. Most men understand this silly game, but he obviously didn't. He had me backed into a corner, and I didn't want to be rude, so I made up a story about being needed around the house. This wasn't a complete lie. I suggested we could possibly meet up the next day and ask for his phone number. The answer seemed to please him, and he laughed. I'm ashamed to admit it took me a few hours for the oddity of the situation to hit me. First and foremost, how in God's name did he get my parents' address? I knew for a fact I never gave it to him. I'm still not sure how he got my last name. The creepiness of the situation made me shiver. Now I found myself at a crossroad. Did I call him and ask how he found me? Or do I just ghost him and hope I didn't hear from him again? After a long night of tossing and turning, I chose the latter. Call me worse all you want, but I very much dislike confrontations. This path just sounded easier to me, and it's too bad it didn't work. Christmas Eve arrived, and I planned to spend it with my extended family. Things went well until my phone began to ring around 10:30 that evening. No one I knew would call me that late, so I thought answered with a bit of curt tone in my voice. And Daryl came at me with an attitude from the start. I'm the one that should be mad. We were supposed to go out tonight and you bailed on me. His tone set me off. I told him I never promised him anything, and he shouldn't assume someone would be free to drop everything on Christmas to meet up with a stranger. He began to talk, but I cut him off. I continued by asking how I got my personal information and told him I didn't appreciate him showing up unannounced. You told me your last name when we talked about hanging out. Don't you remember? I just looked up your parents' address in the phone book. I was at a loss for words. I still insist I never gave my last name, but somehow he got it. Him saying I did name even matter. There was no way I was going to let this dude gaslight me. I'd have enough of his games, and as calmly as possible, I told him to never contact me again and hung up. As far as I was concerned, it was over. Only after I calmed down that I began to wonder how he got my cell number. And this made me furious. So furious, I threw my phone against the wall as hard as I could in fury. And now that I think about it, it was probably the right idea. Christmas Day was spent with my parents and went by quite except for one creepy interruption. I'm not sure Daryl was involved, but it's highly likely. In the time we were sitting down for dinner, my parents' home phone rang. My mom answered it and said hello a number of times, but the caller didn't speak. My mom, being busy, shrugged her shoulders and hung up. My guard was up and considered the recent events. I figured it was Daryl trying to intimidate my family. Fortunately, I kept my family out of the business and they thought nothing of it. The subsequent incidents I was expecting never came, and the remainder of my time there went by smoothly. My last encounter with Dara was probably the creepiest of them all. The morning of the 27th was my final day in town. I was scheduled for an 11 a.m. flight. My dad and I were heading out at around 8, and I was standing next to the car to giving my mom one last hug. I happened to glance over my shoulder and caught sight of someone standing behind a tree. They were about 50 yards away, but I could tell it was Daryl. It shocked me, but I was able to hide it from my parents. I insisted my dad we needed to go. There was no way for me to know what he had planned, but I had a hunch my presence was keeping him there, as we passed him a step behind the tree. But the tree was too small to conceal him, and our eyes met one another's, and I could see the hate seething from him. It was honestly one of the most surreal experiences of my entire life. My dad noticed at that point and made a comment about how lonely a crazy person would be out on 27-degree morning, and he had no idea how right he was. The flight home went out without a hitch. I was relieved to be back to somewhere I felt safe. The possibility of Daryl doing something to my parents stayed with me for several months, but things turned out to be just as I thought. I must have been the sole focus of his obsession, or whatever you want to call it. There was always the worry that he'd show up in my apartment, but that never materialized, thank God. Work was awkward. With every call I expected to hear at Daryl on the other end, that too never occurred. And now that I'm working and living elsewhere, I'm not as worried. Nonetheless, I'm always aware of my surroundings. You can never be sure when your enemy may decide the time is right to pounce. It may all be a product of an overactive imagination, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. After all, I've got a family to worry about now.
This is a true story that I witnessed when I was at my uncle's marriage. There, I saw something that was completely inhuman and scary. After that day, I never saw that creature again, but that time was really horrible, and I wish that I don't get to see him ever again in my life. My name is Douglas, and I am 19 years old. This incident happened to me about 5 years ago, and I was in my schooling age. I was a bright student in the whole class, and among the list of toppers. Back then, there was a system of winter vacations in our school, so every year we got to enjoy a complete month off from school, from mid-December to mid-January. As a kid, I loved that system very much, as I got some free time from my studies, and I could really focus on something that I loved, and that was my research about aliens. I had a collection of a whole bunch of books about aliens and their origin. I had read all of them, and now I was researching what resides outside of our planets. Believe me, from my research till that time, I was completely sure that there were some entities that were completely unknown to us, and I could prove that. From time to time, many countries have witnessed UFOs and strange creatures that were rare in their own species. They were all proofs that told us every time that aliens do exist, but we never believed any one of them and got busy in our daily life. Even NASA confirms the existence of aliens. But leave it all, and let us come to the point. One specific day, I was busy with my research and was working on my laptop in my room when I heard my dad's voice. He was calling me, so I turned off the system and went to him. I saw my uncle there. He was not the real brother of my father, but they had known each other since childhood and lived alone since then in the village, where we had a house that belonged to my grandparents, but now no one lived there. We used to go once a year to that cottage, but the rest of the year, it was completely empty. So, my uncle came to see us with an invitation card in his hand. He was getting married and had come to invite us to his marriage. Dad could never refuse him, so he agreed to come with the whole family. My mother cooked some breakfast for him, and later, he went after having a light breakfast with us, as he had to visit other relatives also to invite them to his marriage. When it came to visiting the village and our grandparents' house, I was always excited, since that place was far, and far away from this city full of commotion. The whole village was in the lap of high mountain ranges, and there was peace and fresh air all around. The whole village was enveloped by fresh air and purity. Also, the people there were very friendly, unlike the city, which was busy with their daily lives. The marriage ceremony was 5 days from then, and we didn't notice how those 4 days had passed. I was really excited to go there, so I was the one who got ready before my parents, followed by my father, and at last, my mother, as I could understand girls needing more time for getting ready, so I don't blame her. We all went to the car and hopped in for our long drive. I said this was a long drive because our village was about 4 hours away from the place where we were living currently. But I was not worried, because I had carried my laptop with me, and I started my research even there. I was totally lost in my research that I didn't notice how 4 hours had passed, and finally, we reached the village. My dad had called our caretaker in advance to clean our house before arriving, and he did so. When we reached there, he was waiting for us and came to us and carried our luggage. We went in and found that our house was in the complete same condition as it was when we left it a year ago. Every time the place looked the same, and this time was no different. We put our luggage there, got fresh, and went directly to my uncle's home, which was just a few steps away from ours. My uncle's father was at the door, receiving the guests, and he knew my father and mother very well. Although I don't know him, he knew me. We all went in and met my uncle. The celebration was at its peak, but I was not a guy who was up for such celebrations, so while everyone was busy talking to other people, I went to a corner and sat there. The marriage ceremony was full of people, and for the next 2 hours, everything went well. I was getting bored there though, so I decided to walk outside a little and get my mood fresh. I went to my mother and informed her that I was going to get fresh. She agreed, but asked me not to go into the woods as it was dark already. I was not planning to go, but since she reminded me now, I thought I have to go take a look through the woods, as in all these years, I had never been there before. I went outside, and instead of going toward my house, I chose to walk towards the woods. I was not planning to go deeper into the forest, but just a few steps in, it was already too dark. I was walking all the way. I could hear the chirping of insects and night birds as I was a little far from my uncle's house, which was full of noise and commotion. I was walking and enjoying the fresh air when I suddenly heard a voice that was like some animal, but not a dog or a cat. I stopped right there and started looking in the direction of the sound. It was dark, and I couldn't see anything properly, but judging from the appearance, I saw a huge-sized creature standing just in front of me, a few steps away. It was several feet long and was completed by humans. I was shocked to see it and couldn't move my feet out of fear. All of a sudden, he roared out loud, and my face became colorless after that. Now, I was confirming whether it was an animal or a creature, but I was in great danger. I somehow managed to move my feet and ran back to my parents without looking back and without stopping even for a single second. I went to my mother and told her everything, but instead of believing me, she scolded me as I didn't listen to her and went to the woods. She asked me to sit beside her and not to go anywhere. I couldn't believe that I told her about something that was inhuman and that she was busy enjoying the marriage ceremony. Whatever the reason was, I never got to know about that. Every time I asked her about that thing, she just asked me to shut up and never answered me. Till now, my question is without any answer, and I am continuing my research, as I was sure that whatever I saw that day was not something I had seen before, anywhere.
This incident happened about 3 years ago. I don't know if my story is something paranormal or not, but I'll leave this decision to you. Decide on your own when you listen to my story. It could be interesting for all of you. My job at my first mortuary was as a service attendant. I was the last one to leave the mortuary after everyone was gone. My work was cleaning the mortuary and setting the alarm on before locking the door. One usual night, we received the body of an old woman who seemed to be in her 80s. His family was large enough, and among them, there was one more woman who looked almost identical to the one who was lying dead. She was her twin sister. After the viewing and last farewell process of that much large family, I cleaned the mortuary, turned off the lights, and made sure whether the alarm was set or not, and after that, I decided to lock the door and head home directly. I did everything as planned and went to my car to go back home. Suddenly, I received a call and the answering department told me to go talk to a client who visited just a while ago to the mortuary. I waited for the call to be forwarded, and the person from the large family asked me if I had seen her grandma, one who was identical to her dead sister. I told him that she went with all of them, and I had checked the mortuary before closing and no one was there. Even then, he requested me to check once again as she loved her dead sister very much, so he had a doubt if someone he sneaked into the mortuary to see her sister. I didn't want to go back to the mortuary and open the door, set off the alarm, and check all over there. It was a hell of a lot of work, but it didn't seem like I had any other options. So I asked him to come back while I checked the mortuary. He thanked me and put down the phone. I moved all my stuff into my car and went back to the mortuary. I was pretty sure that the old lady was not there as I had checked before shutting the door. I opened the door, set off the alarms, and turned on the lights. I stood at the gate and looked all over inside but found no one there. I smiled as I knew this from before and decided to shut the door once again. I walked to turn off the lights, but suddenly I saw the old lady sitting in a dark corner. I couldn't understand how she got in, but I didn't feel anything strange, so I didn't give it much thought. I just went to her and told her to come with me as her family was waiting for her. She stood up from the chair and remained silent without saying a word. I thought she must be sad after her twin sister's death, so I ignored everything and asked her to come with me. She did what I asked her to do and came out. I turned off the lights, set the alarm, and closed the door. I closed the door and asked her to sit on the bench just outside the mortuary. I couldn't have left her alone, so I sat just beside her and waited for her family to come. I was exhausted from my whole day's work, so I fell asleep while waiting there. Just a few minutes later, I got a call. It was the same person from the large family. I thought he had come to take the old lady with him, so I received the call to tell him that the old lady was with me and asked him to come and take him. But before I could say anything, he told me from the opposite side that he found her grandma. She was in his neighbor's home all this time. At first, I thought, how can it be possible? The old lady they were searching for was with me, so how can he claim that he found her? I looked beside me and got shocked. She was not there. The old lady who was sitting beside me till this moment was now gone. I couldn't understand what was going on. I kept on thinking for a while, but when I knew what was going on, my feet felt frozen and 1,000,000 pounds heavier. I couldn't move my leg. Suddenly, I saw that old lady again standing at the door of the mortuary. She was smiling while looking at me, and then she clapped and vanished into thin air. I just pulled my legs with every bit of strength left in my body and ran towards my car. I sat inside the car and left home. After reaching home, I relaxed a bit and thought about everything that I experienced. The old lady whom I saw inside the mortuary was actually the one who had died. That was the first time I experienced something like that, and from that day on, I started to believe in paranormal activities and all that. When the Game of Thrones ended a few years ago, I remember I had continuous dreams about the show, where I was always one of the characters in the series, and I would relive the life that they had been portraying in the show, and it was all so surreal. I would be sometimes Clegane, or sometimes I would be Bran Stark, and sometimes I was Jon Snow, and sometimes even the White Walker King, and every time the scenarios were similar to the one they lived. I remember the days were so horrifying, most of them while there were glimpses of some pleasant days when the princesses and the beautiful women of the show would also bless the dreams. It kept on happening until I started obsessing with another show. It was probably Money Heist. I remember waking up all scared because I would wake up with the dream of being a thief and always being on the run. Every time a big show ends, it triggers my obsession, and it begins. It was quite a dilemma that it left me everything the show ended. I tried to not hyper-obsess about the shows, but failed every time. And then it happened. When the new show began, it was the House of the Dragons, and I remember how it all went off the rails when the show started, and it was only started yet. And there is so much more that is yet to come, and I worry what it would do to me. Because at the intensity of which everything happened in the last couple of days, I don't think I was going to watch this show. It all happened when the pilot of the show House of Dragons was released. As the obsessive person I am, and the love I had for the Game of Thrones, it was quite plausible that I would directly switch to the House of Dragons without blinking an eye, and I did. I remember I did every preparation I had to for the show. I even binged the last season of Game of Thrones, however terrible it may have been, and got ready to witness the same excitement we had at the beginning of Game of Thrones. And as I did get ready, I saw that reviews were raving about how brilliant the show is, and could even be better than Game of Thrones. And I was pretty sure if that was the case, I would be obsessing over this show hard. I remember the moment I clicked on the show, there were goosebumps all over me, and by the time the show ended, I was already out of my chair and out jumping and squatting and putting my hand on my forehead in disappointment, and then on my mouth in wonder. There was so much and so many emotions in the moment I saw the dragons. The very exact moment that I saw the dragons, I got stuck for a moment, as if I was them, as if they were real. And they were in front of me, and I admired them and looked at them in wonder. The episode ended, and by the time it ended, I was in the euphoria of amazement and already imagining the different scenarios of the same episode, and I slept imagining the show. I woke up in the hospital bed. Now people would find it absurd, but I think my landing in hospital had to do with the dream. What happened was the night that I saw the House of Dragons, I dreamt something that made me land in the hospital. And when I recall my dream, everyone got what I was on about. In my dream, I imagined the throne room, and I was in one of the House of Dragons episode, and I wasn't sure what I was until later. I was seeing everything that was happening around, but my vision was different than everyone else's, and I felt like I was huge in front of those tiny humans of the House of Dragons. As I tried to grasp of what was happening, I looked around, and I understood. I was the dragon from the House of Dragon. I was standing tall and fierce and remarkably powerful, and I remember my first instinct was clearly flying. With the queen on my back, I remember I was flying without any worry and with great stealth. And then the queen left me on the top of the castle and left, and I wanted to come down, yet she had told me to not get down. But on the same hand of being a dragon in the dream, I was also me, and aware of that I am the dragon. And as I refused to follow the order of the queen, I took a big leap from the castle. And as I did, I soared high down into the oblivion and spread my wings to take the flight. And then thud, there was a loud noise. And next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital. My father told me that I jumped from the roof of my house and broke my leg. Every time I tell them the thing about my dream, they refuse to believe me and are kind of tilting toward calling me insane. And to be honest, I believe I'm a bit insane to hyper-obsess about shows. I wonder what I would do if I watched the full season. I'm too scared to find out what will happen. So I'm giving television a rest for some months now.
Organized crime is possibly the greatest plague that human society has ever faced. It's a phenomenon that's developed organically throughout almost every culture and nation that's ever existed, from the thug cults of 13th century India to the Japanese Yakuza and the Russian Boers. It seems that certain sections of humanity are simply inclined towards criminality, and just like their law-abiding counterparts, they've found that coalition is often a superior choice to outright conflict. As we all know, the United States also has its fair share of organized crime, most often organized in the forms of New York's Five Families, Murder Incorporated, or perhaps the Crips and Bloods. But is it possible for smaller, less renowned, but more efficient forms of mafia to exist in 21st century America? And what if they took on some very unfamiliar, even comical new forms? Essentially what I'm asking, is there any such thing as a carnival mafia? I can hear some of you laughing already, picturing guys in clown outfits doing the whole Joe Pesci bit of funny. How am I funny? Do I amuse you? Am I serious? Deadly serious. So without further ado, let me tell you the story of Alfred and Pauline Carpenter. Alfred and Pauline loved the carnival. Our sunniest people sometimes call him, hailed from Oak Lawn in California, while Pauline was born in Walnut, Kansas. The couple were married on May 17th of 1986 in El Dorado, Kansas, and spent the next 32 years of their lives raising several loving children along the way. By all accounts, Pauline and are happiest when in each other's company, and many a photograph of the couple have shown just how in love they really were. After retiring from the aeronautical giant Boeing, where they both were employed, Al and Pauline made their living selling homemade jewelry at country fairs. And although it didn't exactly make them a mint, the nomadic lifestyle suited for the septuagenarian couple immensely. They were able to meet interesting new people while traveling the country they loved, and best of all, they got to do it together. This is how they ended up in Great Bend, Kansas on July 13th of 2018. During the Barton County Fair, it was a typical wholesome summer affair, featuring an attractable Ferris wheel, a rabbit show, and a root beer float special. There were prizes for the best homegrown rhubarb stalks, green beans, and summer squash, along with a much-coveted trophy for the county's largest potato. Just like they have done many times before, Al and Pauline Carpenter set up their stall, arranged their goods in charming displays, and began friendly bartering sessions with the local townsfolk. The vast majority of the interactions were positive, but it's believed that at some point during the day, some kind of confrontation occurred between the Carpenters and their fellow carnival workers. At first glance, the confrontation doesn't seem to be too significant, as Al and Pauline continues to operate their stall until the end of the working day and simply retires to the RV for the evening. But as it turned out, the encounter would have deadly implications for them. 4 days later, on June 17th, the Van Buren Police Department received a rather distressing call from a woman who claimed her sister, Christine Tenney, was being held hostage. She went on to tell the dispatcher that 2 criminals had murdered a couple and stolen their RV, and were now holding her sister as a hostage at a residence known as the Vista Hill Apartments. Heavily armed police officers rushed to the apartment complex and were greeted by the sight of a large camper van with bullet holes in it. So far, the information was good, but just as they were in the process of locking the apartment complex down, who should they find alive and well but Christine Tenney. Christine was baffled by the reports of her kidnapping, claiming she was in no danger whatsoever. But when the parked RV was searched, police found trash bags full of bloody paper towels, blood-soaked clothing, and dispensed 9mm bullet casings. It was quite obvious that some kind of violent struggle, perhaps even murder, had taken place in the RV. And when the cops ran the vehicle's plate to discover who the owner was, R. Carpenter's name came back. Naturally, the police were very interested in talking to the person who had made the report in the first place. Given the hand the caller's sister, it was quite easy to track them down, and the person in question turned out to be a 52-year-old Florida woman named Kimberly Younger. Not only did Kimberly have a weak explanation as to why she thought her sister was in danger, chalking it up to a simple miscommunication, but she claimed that Owl and Pauline Carpenter were just fine, and that she'd given them a ride to a casino in the hours before their RV was stolen. And then the cops noticed that Kimberly didn't seem to own a car, and when pressed as to what vehicle she'd used to give the Carpenters a ride, she claimed to have hired a car from a rental place that she couldn't remember the name of. Obviously, investigating officers found this to be highly suspicious, and they ordered the arrest of several carnival workers. When 2 of these carnival workers turned out to be none other than Christine Tanney and an ex-boyfriend of Kimberly Younger named Michael Fowler, police began to realize they were onto something. Then when Michael Fowler seemed to display an alarming amount of guilt during an interview, police applied the right amount of pressure, and he broke through tears of anguish and remorse. Ballard admitted to murdering the Carpenters, and is reported to have said, "She had me suckered the whole time. I just threw my whole life away. It was supposed to be my blood in, and police asked what he meant by blood, and they were well aware of the gangland connotations. But what kind of organization could this lowly carnival worker have been trying to enter after agreeing to cooperate with the authorities to avoid the death penalty?" Ballard showed them the shallow graves in Arkansas where the Carpenters were buried, then went about telling them everything he knew. He claimed to have been in communication with a man named Frank as a chick, owner and operator of a Michigan-based traveling carnival company called Wade Shows Incorporated. But according to Michael Fowler, Frank had another, considerably more sinister occupation as leader of the carnival mafia. At some point during the question, Ballard got out his phone and showed police a series of Facebook messages purported to be between him and Frank Zane Chick. In one message at around 2:30 a.m. on July 14, Ballard had written, "It's done. They're dead. The job now gets out." Frank said Chick replied, "I'm trying to calm down right now." Fowler wrote back, "Deep breaths." Read Z Chick's response, "The first is always the hardest." Jen sent me pictures of the man I sent on to the heads of council wars over. Police tried tracking Z Chick down and were successful in finding a Michigan carnival operator by the same name. But Z Chick denied having any knowledge of the killings, and categorically denied that there was any such thing as the carnival mafia, as a shake went on to say that it didn't know the alleged suspects or the victims. As far as he could recall, they had never been employed by Wade Show Incorporated. He was quick to add that he had no idea why they would use his name. It's kind of bone-chilling. And he said, "I'd like to talk to the cops about it, but no one's reached out. I'm a solid citizen. I have nothing to hide." And Wade Shows has a wonderful reputation as a chick who went on to deny ownership to the Facebook account that was in communication with a murderer. even though it included several seemingly intimate photographs of him. All the cops had to do was establish a concrete link between Zichik and the killer, and they had a solid murder case. But then, just a few days later, Kimberly Junger contacted the police with a jaw-dropping confession. She claimed to have set up a false Facebook account and had been posing as Frank Zichik in order to trick her ex-boyfriend into murdering the Carpenters. She seemed desperate to absolve a chick of all culpability and assured police that she and she alone was responsible for ordering the Carpenters' death. It's also possible that they were she who revealed the involvement of the 37-year-old Texas man named Rusty Frazier Ratio, is said to have facilitated the murders in some manner, possibly by others supplying the weapon or aiding in the disposal of the bodies. It's not clear if Rusty Frazier was working the Barton County Fair around the time that the Carpenters were killed, but his ability to quickly transport the remains out of the state suggests that there may be an even wider network of people who had a hand in the murders. Most of those arrested vehemently denied the existence of any kind of carnival mafia and insisted they acted alone. Michael Fowler later retracted his statement about it being blood-in-style initiation and insisted he simply had been tricked as part of a petty personal rivalry. Kimberly Junger had also spoken of a kind of carny mafia and gave the police some rather detailed stories of how they laundered money, collected protection money, and murdered anyone who refused to cooperate. Is she to retract her statement after the police investigated Frank Zanechick's role in the murders? It's almost as if, though they've been warned to shut their mouth or face the consequences. Officially, law enforcement in both Kansas and Arkansas have stated that there is no carnival mafia. Maintaining the concept is nothing more than the frantic fabrication of two murder suspects. But at the same time, there has never been any conclusive explanation as to why the Carpenters were murdered. It's often explained the way as a disagreement or confrontation that suddenly turned violent. But even so, the root cause of the conflict had never been accounted for. Could it be that the argument arose of the Carpenters' refusal to pay protection money, and were the Carpenters killed so that the Carnival Mafia could make an example out of them, if the official statement of the police is to be believed, and now it's all just crazy coincidence? Frank Zachick's name was picked because he's the wealthy owner of several successful fairgrounds. But until the root cause of the confrontation is confirmed, until we have an actual concrete motive for the Carpenters' murders, there's still room to wonder. Is there really such a thing as the Carnival Mafia?
This happened last year during my student exchange in France and was probably only 2 weeks before COVID imploded. I had to head back to my home country, and that night there was a language exchange at a bar, maybe 30 minutes away from me on the subway. My roommate didn't seem interested in going, so I decided to make this my first night out alone, so I'd already talked to the organizers of the event and they seemed really nice. Plus, the subway in Paris on Fridays closes at around 1:30 a.m., so I knew I had time to go meet people and get home relatively safely. I got there maybe half an hour late, got my little flag stickers that indicated the languages I spoke, and headed into the crowd to try and talk to people. Everything was pleasant. I made friends with the group of guys, and we made good small talk for a solid hour. After a while, the group decided to split and trying to find others to actually exchange languages with since we were all speaking English. At this point, I headed over to the bar to get myself a drink. We're a group of what I can only describe as chaps, but French started annoying me about the flag on my shirt, a Chilean flag. They threw everything out there. Is it in Africa or is it Colombia? At first, I didn't mind correcting them, but it got old pretty quick. After I realized they were just messing around, I left them to it and started talking to an older man by the bar. "You seem nice enough." After talking to him for about 30 minutes, he headed off. And that's when the creepy encounter started. A random guy in his mid-20s, early 30s showed up next to me at the bar and started making conversation by saying, "Oh, I immediately know your flag was from." I just smiled at him. Then he started the, "Oh, you're very beautiful" talk. Look, as a 21-year-old woman, this isn't my first time in this situation. Usually if men aren't being overtly creepy, I'll just smile. Maybe give conversation a try. But if they keep pushing, I just go. I said thanks and kept nursing my drink, hoping he caught the sign that I wasn't trying to talk. He kept asking me about where I was from, why I was here, where I was staying. To which I gave him vague short answers when out of nowhere, and I really mean out of absolutely nowhere, he'd said something along the lines of, "I'm in love with you." Dude, what? I've directed maybe 20 words in total to this man, and I'm getting a full love confession? I let out a laugh. That was half nerves laugh. Are you kidding me? And at this point, he's forcing eye contact, really intense eye contact. I tried everything. I'm not interested. I'm in a relationship. I even headed towards my last resort, which was saying that I was a lesbian, which is true. But he would not budge. He said, "I respect that. It's not your fault." "What, that I'm lesbian?" And he kept on going with what I considered to be the creepiest part. "I want to do romantic things with you," he said. "Excuse me, you what?" This set me off, and that negative gut feeling is one of those phrases that is just off enough that your brain goes, not dinner, not a date, not something just romantic. Well, I wasn't about to find out what it meant. I put on my full bitch face that said, "Look, I know you're just trying to be nice, but I'm not interested, and I am in a committed relationship." I got up and he tried to touch my arm, to which I immediately flinched and shocked daggers at him. "I just think you're beautiful. I want to marry you someday. Maybe you have kids. You have beautiful eyes." Thankfully, the bar had cleared out some, and I was able to cross the floor and grab my Parker. He kept saying things behind me like, "I just want to try romantic things." I then grabbed a random non-creepy man that I had talked to that night who was just leaving and said, "Hey, are you walking to the subway?" And I went with him. My recently professed suitor followed us. I remember him perfectly wearing a tan waterproof jacket, standing right outside the bar door looking at me. The guy I was walking with was going in the company in opposite direction of the subway line, but I wasn't about to risk going down to my own line alone and waiting. It was past midnight, so trains took slightly longer to arrive. Most train stations have an option to switch directions if you mess up without paying again. So I figured I'd go down with my bodyguard of sorts, make him stand with me near the direction change, and if I saw the creep coming, I'd book it and pray a car came in time. We had an app that showed estimated arrival times. It was just my luck that that specific station was undergoing repairs, and it was either get your direction right on the first try, or perish. No direction change in sight. So I did what in my 2 mojito fight or flight mode had to do. I ran back up the stairs and tried to pay again. Except the card I used was one of those cards that once you scan, you can't use again within 5 minutes. I wasn't going to wait that long, and I could hear someone coming down the subway stairs. Paris subway had turnstiles, but it also had doors that only open once you scan. So I sucked in my breath as much as I could, went under the turnstile, and squeezed through my tiny space between the door. I have no idea how I made it past when my Parker on adrenaline is one hell of a drug. I had just managed to make it downstairs when the train was arriving. But as I turned around, I saw him on the sort of bridge area overlooking the train tracks. I managed to grow out my biggest, meanest no. and then said something like, "I want to grow old with you. Give me your number." The train doors opened, and I walked inside backwards, making eye contact with him, saying no again. Luckily, that's just about one of the most universal words out there. I'm thankful to the Friday night 1 a.m. Paris subway crowd. They all seemed confused, but they had the right spirit. A couple of girls waved over so I could stand with them until the door closed, and they went with me until I had to change lines. I felt safer on the 2-minute walk from the subway to my apartment than near that guy in my neighborhood was kind of known for being a big crack hotspot. At least the crackheads left me alone. So if anyone takes something away from this, just be mean. Be rude as hell. I tried being mean a little too late and got one of the creepiest love confessions of my life. A stalker and into the subway, and a story to tell on here.
It happened during the summer vacation when I was 11. My parents and I always go to South India for at least 1 month to see the family. Now, during the whole month of June, there is what we call in our little village the Mango Festival, Mangani Festival. And it's a religious festival where divinity statues are exhibited in parades. There is a large alley filled all along with small temporary stands where people can buy a lot of different things like street food, fruits, toys, clothes and more, all at very cheap prices. My mom and I always go to these stores in the evening at around 5 or 6 when it was already dark, because going during the daytime is just too exhausting with the unbearable heat plus the ground. At that time though, the alley is still very bright, lit up by the stores and decorative lights. That day, my mom decided to stop at a shoe flip-flop stand to buy me some. The seller proceeded to show my mom the collections, and when he noticed my present, he just locked his eyes on me. In the beginning, it didn't bother me much. I just thought that I might look like someone he knew. But he kept staring at me the whole time. He was picking his moment to stare at me. And when my mom was looking in my direction, he'd stop and he'd stare back again when she looked away. It was obvious at that point though, and it made me very uncomfortable. Eventually, we had to leave without buying anything, but the seller insisted that we should come tomorrow because he had a new shipment of whatever new collections were arriving. 2 days later, my mom called me to go to the festival stands, but I was reluctant to go this time. I told her I was genuinely tired and didn't want to go. But she yelled at me, saying that I was always lazy and wasting my summer vacation by staying at home all day. So I went with them. Our first shop was the cheap jewelry store. Then my mom made me do something that I always hated, but she did it all the time in order to help me with my shyness. She said, "Take my purse and go to the shoe stand by yourself and buy a pair that you like. I'll be watching you from here." I refused at first, but she progressively raised her voice. So to avoid being humiliated in front of other kids, I did what she said. When he saw me approaching his stand, he welcomed me with his unsettling smile. He proceeded to show me all his new sandals. And as I was his only customer, he even took the time to put the sandals on me, one by one, asking if they fit well. At that point, I just took whatever shoe quickly to get out of there. And now, it was time for the checkup. I was and still am stressed to order or talk to a vendor. I used to stutter a lot during the social situations, but this time, it was different. It wasn't only stress, and this gut feeling telling me that this man is strange and that I shouldn't be here with him alone. I handed him the money and was waiting for my change. But his demeanor suddenly changed. He became fidgety and showed frustration over the cash register. He then said that the cash register had broken for some unknown reason and that he wouldn't open I glanced outside to see if my mom was still watching me. And she was. And when we made the eye contact, she made a gesture with her hand telling me to hurry. She was observing at an angle, and I was next to the cash register at the corner. I couldn't see a property anymore. And at the same time, the seller told me that he had another cash register in his trailer. So then he took my money and went there. It was a sort of open shop, so you could see his trailer if you were right in front of it. He went inside his trailer for a long time, and I could hear the voices of another person inside. They were talking, but I couldn't understand exactly what they were saying. So for around 10 minutes, I was just standing there waiting awkwardly and peeking back at my mom occasionally to make her aware of my presence at the checkout. Then another client entered the shop and was looking at the merchandise. She asked me where the vendor was, and I told her he was in the trailer. At the sound of our conversation, the vendor peeked from the trailer window and said to the woman, "We aren't taking any more clients, ma'am. We were closing soon." The woman left soon after, but it seemed strange that he decided to close so suddenly and so early. It was only 6 p.m., and usually the shop is closed late between 8 or 9. I couldn't leave though, as I was still waiting to get my change back. Then the vendor picked me up from his trailer's window again and said that he'd finally managed to get my change. He then made a sign with his hand, as if to say, "Come here." I wasn't sure about what he wanted, so I said nothing and waited where I was awkward. After a moment he peeked again and said, "You can come now." I was confused. Why couldn't you just come outside and give me my change back? And why the hell he was taking so much time? I didn't say anything, but instead I peeked back outside to see my mom. And when she saw my concerned face, she finally decided to come and help me. I said to the seller, "Actually, I'm waiting for my mom." And when my mom entered the shop, the seller got out of his trailer almost immediately and handed my change back. He wasn't frustrated anymore, but smiling and very talkative, and even asked my mom if we were from here, to which she responded that we were from France and we were spending our summer vacation in our hometown. My mom and I went to other shops, but I could still see other clients coming to the shoe shop, even though he was going to close. By the time Mom had finished her shopping, it was 8 p.m., and we were on our way back home. I could still see the lights from his shop when we got closer. And I could even see he was using the same cashier that was supposed to be broken. At that age, I didn't realize how creepy this whole thing was. It just seemed odd and awkward. But years later, I finally realized that his gaze, his behavior, and his touches were all so wrong. And that night, I bet his intentions were even worse. Luckily, that night was the last time I ever saw him, and during the festival of the following year, I couldn't find his stand anymore, and his slot was occupied by a street food stand. So yeah, creepy shoe seller, let's never meet again, please.
When I was 19, I was a Marine, and had stupidly used my military perks to get a home loan and buy my first house. I moved a barracks room worth of stuff into this place that seemed to me like a palace. Of course, I went out and bought some bar stools, a futon to sleep on, until I got a bed and some used coffee tables for my TV. I also had a dog with me. I was unpacking my meager belongings in the living room and noticed the car had pulled in my driveway and blocked me in. I walked down, and there stood a man offering to sell me a home security system. The man was dressed in khaki and a polo with a name tag that I can't recall, and the car didn't have a logo on it. It should have been a red flag for me, but I figured that some people in the job didn't drive company vehicles. He gave me his card. I don't even remember the company he told me he was with, to be honest. Here was a friendly salesman giving me his speech about needing a system and all the perks that would come with being able to wash the exterior of my house at any time. As a low-ranking military member, I knew I couldn't afford yet another thing, so my mind was working to try to get this man to go away. Even considered ninja chopping him or whatever it was we Marines do in hand-to-hand just to get him to leave. But I'm a sort of passive person. That's supposed to be nice. Now, we'll call it polite. I won't be rude to someone doing their job. I've been in customer service, so I could relate. I tried politely declining his offer after he had tried to show me some stuff on his iPad, but you know how persistent the types can be. I'll admit, my own stupidity when answering his questions like giving out too much information. Do you live here alone? Now, I live here with my wife and our large 3 dogs. At least I added in the large part. Her dogs hadn't actually moved in yet, and hers were just fat, though they were more vicious than my own good boy. The 2 women living together probably seemed like easier targets. I also mentioned being a Marine when he asked. He had seemed a bit shocked but wouldn't be deterred. What kind of security system do you have? My dogs and me? Not the best answer I could have given. I wasn't exactly intimidating. I mean, I would be terrifying if I had a gun or something. I've been using my whole life and I've never missed a target, alive or inanimate. If you would invite me in, I could show you the best places to set off cameras. He mentioned more than a few times. Each time made me more and more creeped out, thinking that he wanted to potentially rob me. Not that there was much to take, and despite being an assault victim, not all I could consider was possible burglary, and made sure that he stayed away from my house while we talked. We were outside for about 15 minutes total, and he spent most of the time trying to politely get away from him and to retreat inside. I wound up at my wit's end with social niceties and just walked away, leaving him standing alone in my front yard. I walked into my house and locked the door. He got into his car and left, and I thought nothing more of it. After some unpacking, I couldn't do much. I had nowhere to put most of it. I ate some junk food and put together the futon. I got it all decked out with my fluffiest blankets, made sure the doors and windows were locked, and went to lay down in the living room. Looking back, I'm not sure why I didn't put it in the bedroom. They all have blinds in the rooms, take a bit of getting to perhaps I'm wanting to be near an exit or some context my back door is a double glass pane door. At the time I didn't have curtains on, but I did have blinds in the kitchen window. My kitchen, living room, and dining room are all connected, but there's a wall in the living room that I strategically situated my futon, again so it couldn't be seen by the back doors or the front door window. Call me paranoid, whatever. I had been laying down for a few hours and about 11 my dog off the futon and went to the back door. My dog is large and looks like a Rottweiler in coloring. He's a Coonhound Max, but I guess city people don't have hunting dogs. But he's never heard anything in his life. He'll greet strangers at the door with the tail wagging hardly barks. He stood back there for a bit and whined a few times. I ignored him. It was probably just a squirrel. But then he started growling, a sound that I'll never forget. It sent terror straight through me as I sat alone in the dark. I'd only ever felt that fear once when a mountain lion screamed, and I realized that I was powerless against nature. But that's a story for a different thread. The point is these sounds are designed to scare you, and it petrified me. I was frozen and wanted to whip out to hide to call the cops, but I realized it was someone was out there, and they'd for sure see my phone light and know where I was. So while my dog stayed stationed at the back door, I talked myself up just enough to move off the couch and investigate. Still scared out of my mind, I slunk to the kitchen and grabbed a kitchen knife, one of the only utensils I had thanks MA, and crept to the kitchen window. I was squatting amongst the cabinets so I couldn't be seen from indie windows, bouncing a little, trying to gear up to peel back the blinds. My brain was telling me irrational things, horror stories that I had read come to life. To be real, I was ready to just cower and give up. I'm not a brave person. I was in communications, for God's sake, pretty far from any life-threatening situation. Well, not one of them involves people in my house, and my one safe space, my hideout, my protection from anything outside wanting in. I've always been afraid of home invasions that stem from an incident when I was younger that isn't even really worth further mentioning. The point being, if someone dares into my safe place, it's not safe anymore. I thought I couldn't get scared more in that moment, but then I saw a male figure in my backyard, and my heart dropped. I wasn't very far from the window I was looking out of. He was bold enough not to wear anything over his head, and I saw the blonde hair in the moonlight. It only took me a few seconds to recognize the security salesman in the dark. He was on the edge of my porch watching my back door, watching my dog. I jumped up quickly, climbed over the bar counter, and turned on the light as I went toward the back door to let my still growling dog out in hopes that he did at least get rid of the man, if not injure him. No dice. As soon as the lights came on, he had just enough time to go low, the low part of the fence to safety, before my dog even got off the porch. I didn't sleep that night. My dog sat on the futon with me. Comas could be having done this job. The next morning, I found a police report, but I couldn't tell his name or what company he was with, having lost the card that he gave me. They sent some patrols through the area, and I found out that all legitimate salesmen should give an idea of Honda request. That night, I had 2 friends stay with me, ready for him to come back to either try to rob me or commit some nefarious acts, or be trying to scare me into home security. It didn't come back. I haven't seen him since. My dog hasn't growled like that since either, but I'm terrified for the next time that I hear it. I can never forget the cold, callous nights in the ghost village of Norway, where I was abandoned by my friends, or so I thought they were. We had been on break for a while now, and there was something that they were all planning, and I was not in on it. I was just told that we were planning a trip to the ghost village. We packed all our stuff and headed to the village for the night, and all of our friends were there, but I had no idea what was planned. My relationship with my friends was a bit complicated. We weren't friends when we first started, and soon they wanted me to be with them. They were all quite older than me, and I was the one holding their stuff and doing all their homework. Everybody around me told me that I should not hang out with them, but they were the only ones in school who willingly hung out with me, so I didn't really have any other option. So I was friends with them. It was not like they ever bullied me. They just wanted me to do stuff for them instead, and even protected me from getting bullied, so I was thankful for whatever their friendship was worth. They planned something for the summer break. I didn't know what they were planning, and they told me later that they are planning to go to the ghost village nearby for camping night and wanted me to come with them. I was pretty excited to hear that, and it was the first time that anyone was bringing me along with them for a ride, and I took them up for the offer and decided to get things ready and did everything they told me to do and packed up the bag real good. I packed everything and decided to go with them, and in a hurry, I forgot telling my parents about it. I didn't really care for it because the village was really near and it wasn't one of those risky things in the forest, or so I thought it wasn't. It was the second day in the break, and we left early in the morning. It was still dark outside and it was freezing, even though it was summer. They decided to stop at the old house which belonged to one of them, and they told me that they will all set up camp in there, and I agreed and set up the things for them there. I had brought most of the food and drinks. They told me to put my bag in the basement. I did that and went back, and then they told me that they will start playing hide and seek in a while, and I was the one who was to seek first. The game started, and by the mid of it, I have found everyone, and I was found the last of them. He accused me that I cheated, and I was wondering how could that be possible. Now it was my time to hide, and I saw they were all planning something. And then they told me to hide, and then one of the friends and me hid in the basement while the rest someplace else. 10 minutes later, we realized someone was coming, so my friend said that he will change position, and as he did, he got up and left the basement. And on the way out, he locked the door from the outside. They all went ahead with the game, and I realized that they were still playing because I was able to hear all the commotion that was going on upstairs. So I knew that I was still not getting caught, and I was pretty excited about that. But then it had been a lot of hours, and I was feeling cold. I was calling out, "Guys, hey guys, I'm in here, open up." I started banging on the door, but there was nothing. I realized maybe they all have left. And then 10 hours become a day, and then days were increasing. I was cold and hungry. Thankfully, my bags were there, so I did not starve. But then 3 days later, it must have been 3, because for me, it felt like forever. The police knocked down the door and found me all wrinkled, holding my bag closer. and I was too cold to even react. Later, I was told that it was the boys. They left me there on purpose, and they weren't even going to tell. It was my father who confronted one of the guys, and it was the only reason that they were able to find me. I wonder, I might have decayed there if my father didn't confront one of them. That day and today, I don't really trust humans anymore. Too much work. I remember the day as clear as the water in the freshest lake. The day was gloomy, and the clouds were all over, and the day was not what I was expecting it to be. I never wanted to go to the theater that day, but then I had to. No option. I had to go and watch the film anyway. I was on the date with this girl, and she decided that the best place to go with me on the first date would be a film. I think it was the movie Snake on a Plane. I honestly thought it was the weird choice to go on a date and watch snakes on a plane. It's not exactly the kind of film that would get your date excited about you. I was still a bit optimistic knowing that I would see my girl in there. We decided to meet at the mall, and she was looking real beautiful when she arrived. I'd only known her for a month. She was to work the same job as me. I was the manager at the furniture store, and she worked there too. I was really fascinated by her, and I asked her out. She agreed on the condition that she would choose the place, and hence we were here. And she chose a movie, and that too, Snakes on a Plane. I was certain that it wasn't the best choice for a date, but I was still agreed knowing the girl and how she was. She was the girl that I did not want to let go. And then we meet at the AMC theater in the city, and it was a later night show, so there was this feeling that I might get lucky tonight. And she met me, and she already had the tickets and was waiting for me with popcorns and soda. And then when I saw her, I realized I was lucky. I was giddy to be there, and to be on the date with her. We took our seats and sat around and started talking as the trailers were going on, and she kissed me as the movie started. And the movie started, and it was a pretty intense film. When it started and we were having our time, sitting and talking, there wasn't much to talk about. The noise in there were intense. The hall was packed, and there was no way I could get in any kisses or even a decent talk with her there. And on top of that, if it's an interesting movie, you don't really want to talk. And the thing is, I was finding the movie interesting, and I was watching it. I felt something whisk through my legs, and I tried to look what it was, but there was nothing that could be made. So I sat there, and so was the girl on a date with. And we're not talking to each other, but something holding my hands at best when the movie got excited, and then something bit me in the leg. It was a little sting, and then I looked down, but there was nothing. I tried looking to the adjacent seat, but there was nothing either. But then 3 rows down, a woman screamed and she yelled, "There's a snake! There's a snake in here!" And then everybody laughed, thinking that maybe she loves the movie too much since the movie was Snakes on a Plane. And then a man 4 rows down yelled, "There's a snake here, it just bit me! It just bit me in the leg!" And then some of them across the hall spotted one in the corner and they yelled, "There are more than one snake in here! Everybody get out! There are a lot of snakes in here!" And then there was a panic all around. And then I saw it. A black-colored snake hiding in the darkness of the seat, and it slithered. But this time, I was able to make it out. And I held the girl and told her to jump on the seat, and everyone was over their seats right now, and some were running towards the exit in the panic, all while the film was going on. And then we had no choice but to stop the show. They put on the lights, and there it was, almost 6 to 7 snakes, and there were people panicking because a lot of them were bitten. The snake wranglers were all called in, and everybody was in the state of panic as the police and the ambulance arrived along with the snake wranglers. Luckily, no snake was venomous, and everybody would be all right. And then, they told it is the work of someone who knows snakes. Upon further investigation, it came out that one of the guys in the same show as us had released the snakes, and himself was the snake expert. And he did this in protest of the film. He thought it showed snakes in bad position. Well, his feelings might have been in the right place. What he did was completely wrong, and he got punished for what he did, and rightfully so. Bumble. No offense to anyone who's had success on it, but the app is cursed for me now. I went on a date with a guy who looked like a Disney prince who grew up in a bad neighborhood. Swear to God, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen and was almost covered in tattoos. I wasn't even surprised when he said he had been in the county jail for 18 months after some BS where a guy got stabbed. That's his quote. I know, giant red flag, but I didn't even care. This guy was so hot, and with my logic of, well, the justice system in this country is screwed, I was good to go. Anyway, we met for drinks. He was nice, paid for everything, the perfect gentleman. He seemed particularly interested in me to lots of guys will literally only talk about themselves on a date, which is the most annoying thing ever been. This guy was all like, what are you into? Where do you go to school? Blah, blah, blah. Eventually, I got into telling him how I play classical guitar and about the handful of concert performances I'd taken part of during college. I still play an awful lot, but it's more gypsy jazz these days than Montolo Sinclair. That being said, I'm real passionate about flow meat. So my maternal grandmother is from Spain, so I think it's just in my blood. Anyway, when he said your passion is captivating or something like that, I just about melted. He seemed really impressed that I'm somewhat musical person. And I'll be honest, when I say I kind of milked that after that conversation, moved on to different things. More drinks came, and as we gradually got drunker, the conversation got a little faster and looser. At the end of our date, he's walking me to my Uber, and I'm debating whether or not to kiss him before I leave when he comes out with, if I wanted to always remember me, break your ring finger. You know, because they don't heal well. And then you'll have think of me when playing in some of what my brain for a second. And when I look at him like, he laughed and kind of made out like he was kidding. But it was in an almost the exact same way as when an ex had told me I had fat thighs, then tried to retract it when I got upset. It was totally in that I totally meant it. And I'll pretend I'm kidding, since it made me look like a psychopath kind of way. I gave him the benefit of the doubt at first, but he'd also made my mind for me above whether or not I was going to make out with him a resounding no, I can assure you. I told him I'd see him again, and I think actually meant it at first. But over the next few days, mulling it over and telling girlfriends about it made me realize that this guy was not good for me. In fact, hinting at violent tendencies, having already been to jail over a stabbing, these were ginormous red flags, and if I ignored them, well, I was putting my life on the line. So I just kind of ghosted the guy, didn't delete his contact or anything, just kind of kept him on the back burner just in case he changed my mind on it. Now there's a Facebook group for girls in my town, and if one of us is assaulted or roughed up on a date or just while drinking for whatever reason, we can go to the Facebook group and warn other girls about it. Now, please don't go thinking it's some horde witch hunting thing. There's no mob online justice that goes on. Our priority is liaising with state police departments to see that predators are actually dealt with. Not a week goes by since my date with this guy, and a new post starts trending in that group. Whenever a post gets traction like that, it's usually when something bad has happened in the form of assault, but sometimes it's when something good happens, like when a predator gets heated into jail. That time, it was something bad, really bad, and then affected me personally. A girl had screenshotted a guy's Tinder profile and uploaded it to the group, along with a story about how he'd said the creepiest stuff on her date with her. When she wouldn't go back to his place, he got handsy, and eventually hit her when she'd called him some unsavory names over it. It was my jailhouse Disney prince, and that could have been me getting beat in some Walgreens parking lot. The cops got a hold of the guy, and he went right back to jail for breaching probation. Only he wasn't on probation for anything like a stabbing incident. It was indecent assault that he'd been convicted of. No kidding, huh? Girls don't ignore red flags. And if a guy mentions being in trouble with the cops, there are ways that you can find out about what. A lot of court documents are available for public viewing after a certain date. So I'm serious when I say that you can look your date up to make sure he's not been on the wrong side being a messed up pervert. Be safe, sisters. Always.
I went to beauty school just after high school.
So it's just learning what it is like to be an adult, work, go to school, and socialize at the same time. If you've ever gone to beauty school, you know the hours are pretty lengthy, and it's a lot of work in a short amount of time. You also know that you're mostly crammed with a lot of women of different ages and a few boys if there's a straight man in school, and he's even mildly attractive, obviously considering you're attracted to that type of person. Most women that score just so at all because it's the only male person we are seeing during most of our weeks. That takes me to Dave. A few years older than me, tall, drives a Ducati to school, mysterious and handsome. Every girl was always putting a little extra makeup, turning their hips towards him, flirting when he was around. He was cute, quiet, and always knew what to say. I was as interested in catching his eye till he randomly asked me to meet up with him for a bite one day after school. I was single, needing to experience dating for the first time, and it didn't seem that bad to hang out with. Things started off very sweet and genuine. He'd sent good night texts, joke with me at school, and even genuinely seemed like he wanted to hang out more and more. We'd go to bars, and he knew everyone, so I could just get right in. I was underage at the time. We go eat, see shows to step drink. I feel like I was starting to feel like an adult enjoying the life and being wooed by a handsome, slightly older man. We drove around on his bike. He'd take me to nice, quiet dinners, always offered to pay, and even didn't little things like hold his arm out when I was walking downstairs or off a curb. I'd never experienced this type of gentleman before. But as quickly as the sweet dates came, so did a very weird, calculated, and controlling behavior. He would start to ask why I didn't smile with my teeth. Was it because I was embarrassed at myself? He would sit behind me working at school and taught me about how slow I was. He'd say things like, "Don't sit like that," or "Say things that way. That's not what ladies do, and I'm a lady, right? Don't wear that lipstick, it's trashy." Butts, I guess. Maybe I was being inappropriate. Maybe he's right. I should act more like an adult and a child. Be better at school. Look more like an adult. He brought me to his house one night, a place he rented a room from. Suddenly, this stoic Edward Cullen type turned into a person I didn't recognize. Outside of the random mood shift, his room was filled with clothing and garbage like old Gatorade bottles filling the floors. There was a TV and a bed. Of all the things I could really make out in the room, he brushed dirt off his bed for me to sit down. I hung out for a while, and he oddly confessed he never brushed his teeth. Okay, well, looking at this room, I could believe that. He also mentioned that he just bought new clothes when he needed them and never washed. The dirty ones just left them there. This is all in the first 2 or 3 weeks. Kind of a red flag if you asked me. The lights were off at one point, and we're watching a show, and I see a light like a cell phone right outside the window behind the TV. I jump and get his attention, but he had to have seen. He brushes it off, saying it must be a roommate though. I notice he's texting someone at the same time. Let it go for the night. Eventually go home, but so feel uncomfortable. When the phone calls started happening in the stories of his ex, they lived together. She was 10 years older than him and had a 6-year-old kid. She was crazy. If he and I would hang out, I'd suddenly start getting calls from an unknown number. The minute I walked in my door, they would ring to my voicemail, got them, and no one would say a word till the message ran out of time. They'd happen every 10 minutes for 3 or so hours. I asked him about this, if it was him, and he said it may just be his crazy ex. But how would she have my number? He'd say, "Well, I have to give her some of her things, and she stole my phone at one point. Must have taken your number. So the gentlemanly dates would happen, and the gifts, sending roses and coffee to my work, showing up with a massage and spa packages every week. We still saw each other at beauty school, almost alien. He'd be kind, but it was always hush-hush until it was outside of school. I was torn. This person lying? Or is this the kind of person to want to date me? Maybe he just has some flaws and a crazy ex. Then the texts and Facebook messages started coming, clarifying it was her. He told me about your messed up life and secrets you've told him. I know he just saw you. I know you were at his house. I was outside his window looking in. Your red dress was nice. He laughs about you. Poor you. Just a stupid little girl. And stuff like that over and over. I block her. Then she'd have friends send me the same BS. She freaked me out. And he always denied it and apologized for her behavior. Then the word Daisy wouldn't show up for school, and he would text me during the day saying they were together, sending pictures of him. I tried to confront him, but he always denied having anything to do with her and repeating that she wanted to ruin his life. And then she started going to my work, telling my coworker she was my friend and would color things on the kids menu, like my name plus Dave, art, her, and tell them she wanted me to have it. She'd send me a random picture of him in a booth at my work, and I put the pieces together when I got there and got her notes, asking my coworkers where she was sitting and what she looked like. It was gross and embarrassing, let alone scary. My car was broken into at school, and nothing was taken from it, but a bill that had my address on it. Then was so scared. I came home at any point in time, and she started calling me over and over as soon as I closed the door behind me. I felt trapped. She would call my work and school saying she was my mom and try to get more info on me, or call them as a customer saying to get me fired. My roommates finally kicked me out because they were rightfully freaked out. So I turned to the police. They put me in contact with a detective who I handled all of the calls, texts, and messages, plus notes she left in my work. I never answered the phone or responded to a single message from her. I had hundreds of calls, texts for at least a month. They came in every day from the same number. I never blocked that number after the first few were blocked, so I could keep a log of all the attempts. Plus, I have to keep a journal of every incident leading up to me coming to the police just in case. I watched a lot of crime documentaries. He told me that there was nothing he could do to trace the number back to a specific person, and since she hadn't threatened my physical safety, his hands were tied. The very next day, he calls me in, he's furious, telling me he can't help me if I'm harassing her back. I was confused, and when I asked what he meant, he said, "You're calling a mother non-stop throughout the night, terrifying her and her kid." But it was a 20-year-old, and she was 36. Of course he's going to believe the adult, but I never called her. He asked me to come to his office and show me his evidence he has against me. She forged him tons of texts, saying things like, "Well, I can't really say them here, but they were just toxic," which is full of malice, and I just broke down. I would never say some of the things that she had said that I said, and I know I didn't send these tons of texts, especially overnight when I had school the next day. He didn't believe me and completely dismissed me. He ultimately turned against me and was now on her side, and this was crushing. I broke things off for good with David, basically told him to screw off. We still had to go to school together, and he was terrible. I embarrassed myself in front of my friends defending him so long. My work, my school, who I had to beg to make sure this girl didn't come around again, and a detective who ultimately didn't believe a word I said just to get some peace. My friends were tired of seeing me scared, stressed, and constantly talking about this weird situation happening to me. I was over it all. She finally left me alone once I moved, got a new car, a new phone, deleted social media. But it still freaks me out that we all live in the same town. She messaged me a few years ago from a different account when I was back on social media, and said she was sorry that she was manipulated by Dave and that they did this to too many girls. This was disturbing and gut-wrenching to me, to the mother of a 6-year-old, really have nothing better to do than play messed up mind games with a sociopath, maybe 2 sociopaths together. I am a 23-year-old Italian male living in a not-so-small town in southern Italy. No, it's not the most secure town in the world. In fact, we have a long history of microcriminality connected to the local mafia. But if you're smart, you keep yourself out of trouble. I need to explain my daily commute in context first to make things better to understand. I live in the old part of town, as here it's very common for every town to be built around its antique part. And after 1980 earthquakes destroyed a good part of it, so it's very affordable to live here. And some parts are beautiful and well kept. Where others aren't so, you find good families and great folks sharing spaces with more pesky dudes. Doesn't help that the town's castle has been converted into a prison. Yes, what the hell, Italy? Luckily, only for minor offenders now for the encounter itself this happened. In January, I just came back from uni. It's a 20-minute drive in the car. But with awful public transport, it takes anywhere from an hour to 2 hours to get home. I like to study in the library until it closes at 6:30, and I usually get home at 8 p.m. or later. I'm greeted by my dog Maya. She's a 1-year-old lab, and I take her for a walk around this part of town in the castle since it's her favorite spot to meet other street dogs. She was taking longer than usual to do her business, and it was freezing, and I was wearing clothes a little bit lighter than I should. Plus, it was snowing, which is super rare here. Maya saw snow and was very excited. It was at that point I decided to walk back home and grab a jacket to better take delight of the occasion, and on my walk home, I cut through and passed through this abandoned building under construction. It was just the pillarsome floor done, but a lot of kids used to play and climb around it. I just taken the shortcut. When I see this guy standing there, and his back facing me still as a rock, with his head facing up to the first floor of the abandoned building, wearing a dirty beanie, heavy winter jacket, and a tracksuit far too wide for his build. And there he was. At first I was frozen and spawned, but I wasn't an extraordinary encounter since there was a lot of weird people around here when I decided to pass on. But the first red flag was when I watched Maya, and she had her back fur raised and was looking at the guy dead. She never did this, and as we walked, she kept this odd behavior up. I realized I'd never seen him around these parts, and I knew he wasn't local. His face was creepy. Greasy hair, a 3-day beard, and he extended his hand to Maya stupidly. That calmed her down a bit. Maybe he was just mentally ill walking around. But anyway, there's a dormitory for mentally ill people not too far from here. But when he was trying to pet my dog, I hear something moving on the first floor. I thought it may have been a cat, but Maya would have already been jumping around if she had smelt it. I looked around and see this little girl of about 10 years old who had fear in her eyes, really desperate. And I'm not exaggerating, the detail, she had a familiar face though. Must have been one of the kids that played through this building. She must have seen me walking my dog around, because as soon as she recognized me or my dog, she caught eyes with me and whispered help with her lips. After this, I turned my head around and the creep is watching me now. I'd like to say he had the usual creepy smile, but he didn't. He was just wearing a very serious face with dead eyes. I don't know what to do. I'm 6'2" and kind of imposing, but I've never fought anyone and I'm generally just a peaceful guy and a fraction of the second guy this looks up and says, "Calm down, sweetie. We need to get home before the food will get cold." Yeah, 10 out of 10. Totally believable, mate. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" I ask. "I'm her uncle. I need to get her home to eat," he says with the most serious look on her face. I was thinking what to answer to use as an excuse to bring her down and get her to safety. And being the sarcastic type in this situation, I say, "That's strange because I'm her uncle. This doesn't add up." At this point, the little girl has the brilliance to lean off and say her uncle, "Can you help me get home? Mommy will be worried." Now, this guy didn't seem too threatened at the time, just kind of creepy. So I go under the building and take the little girl. And as I prepare to grab Maya, she first growls at him and then barks. Now she usually barks this really high-pitched bar, but this time with this guy, it was really low pitch and even scared me. To that, I turned around to see the guy with a hand behind his back reaching for something. Oh crap, I think I'm not a good fighter. And if this guy had a knife, I'm gonna win badly. He stops his reach motion as the bark is now continuous, and in the heat of the moment, the little girl leaned off and I grabbed her with one arm, the other arm keeping Maya at bay as a deterrent. And while she was descending, I asked her if she had a phone. "No, I don't." I could tell she was on the brink of tears. As soon as she touched the ground, I unblocked my phone and gave it to her. She took the phone and immediately legged it. I should have been glad to, but my immediate thought was if she did this, all I have to stay on my phone, I would have been deadly pissed. After all, it wouldn't have been unusual, but I basically asked her to take it so it wouldn't have been impossible to think. Anyway, the girl was gone. I turned around and this dude has a knife found, not a pocket knife, one of those huge kitchen knives that you use to cut bakery bread with. And me being so careless in the kitchen, I know how damn sharp those things can be. So I decided to run away too, but Maya decided, nope, I want to stand here barking at him. And I couldn't manage to pull her away as she's almost a 30-kilogram dog. But this was a grip too strong for even her. So we were there stalling, and this guy starts swinging the knife in the air. I went to run. If I leave my dog, I know she'll end up really bad. And even if I managed to pull her, he could run after us. And there we were, swinging the knife with empty eyes, and the dog barking and me crapping myself, not knowing what to do. And to make everything worse, my hands were freezing cold for not wearing gloves, and the grip leash was really starting to hurt. The thing that still surprised me in the situation is the fact that I am absolutely sure that people around the block could hear us. Not a single one decided to take a look anyway after what seemed like a long time, but was probably around 2 minutes. I hear heavy footsteps from the street I came from. And a lot of people show up. Probably her dad and some relatives and friends with a baseball bat. This is not going to end well, I thought. As soon as the creepy guy saw those men, he threw the knife in my direction with terrible aim, but still, I had to move not to get hit, and started to run me trying to go into the street in my direction. I didn't even try to block him because I was still frozen by the knife under toe, but Maya bit his leg, ripped a piece of his tracksuit off. I still have it. She's so proud of it and is now one of her favorite toys. But the dude didn't even care and ran for his life with some of the girl's supposed relatives behind him. He eventually managed to get them off, but the girl's father came to me. I thought to thank me, but instead he screamed, "Who the hell was that?" while waving his bat menacingly. I look at the girl telling him to calm down, but he only got more pissed until the girl ran up to him telling him that I had helped her and gave me my phone back. After that, he calmed down and thanked me for helping his girl and offered me to grab a coffee at his house. I politely refused and went home, deciding that was enough adventure for one night and I was still tired as hell from uni. And slept it off. The next morning, the police rang my doorbell to take my statement, as the guy managed to run off and showed me a book with all the signaled photos' IDs and stuff, but nothing came out of it. He probably wasn't even from a nearby town. You could tell from his dialect and accent it was a slight variation from town to town, and that was the end of it. I surely did not do the best I could have, but I'm glad I still got to help out the little girl. I don't know what would have happened to her if someone hadn't shown up. So creepy wannabe uncle, let's not meet.
Junko Furuta was born in Misato, Saitama Prefecture on January 18, 1971. She lived at home with her parents and her two brothers, one elder and one younger, and could often be found watching her favorite drama series, Tambu, whenever she wasn't studying. During her teenage years, she attended the Yoshio Minama High School and had a part-time job during after-school hours at a plastic molding factory. It was this job that helped her gain enough experience to be offered at an electronics retailer where she planned on working after she graduated from high school. She was also offered the job because of her almost flawless academic performance. She had an extremely high grades and very infrequent absences. She also saved up money from a part-time job so that she could go on a post-graduation celebration trip around the Japanese home islands. But Junko would never get to go on this trip, as she was about to have a hellish encounter with members of the Japanese criminal organization known as Yakuza. On November 25, 1988, a teenage boy named Hiroshi Miyano, joined by his friend Nobuhiro Manuta, was wandering around his hometown village of Masato with mischief on his mind. It was then that they spotted Junko riding her bike home after finishing her shift at the plastic molding factory. Together, they hatched a devious scheme. Nobuhiro suddenly gave chase and kicked Junko off her bike before being chased away by Hiroshi, who acted as the Good Samaritan and offered to walk her home in safety. The whole thing was a ruse disguised to win her trust, and it worked like a charm. Junko accepted the offer and followed Hiroshi, who said he knew a shortcut to the neighborhood she lived in. But unbeknownst to her, Hiroshi was leading her to a nearby warehouse, and once he let her inside, he told her he was a member of one of the world's most feared criminal organizations, the Yakuza. Hiroshi then told Junko that if she did not do everything she was told, he would have her killed. He then indecently assaulted her in the warehouse, then again in a nearby hotel, with Junko so terrified that she did not want to raise a peep to anyone she saw as they walked between the two places. While they were at the hotel, Hiroshi called his friends from the telephone there, bragging to them that he had procured his own personal plaything. The group of friends had a history of kidnapping girls and carnally attacking them, so his friends pleaded with him to share his new prize. Sickeningly, Hiroshi agreed. Just before 3 a.m. the following morning, Hiroshi forced Junko to follow him to a local park, where 3 friends of his were waiting for them. The boys went through Junko's belongings, finding that her home address was written on one of her notebooks. Now they had the ultimate leverage over her, claiming that if she disobeyed or tried to escape, a team of Yakuza hitmen would murder her mother, father, and brothers in the family home. Junko was then taken to an empty house owned by Nobuhiro's parents, where each of the boys took turns beating and defiling her. Junko believed every word of the boys' threat and took each beating without complaint, purely out of the love for her family, who by this point are becoming extremely concerned about her absence. On November 27th, Junko's parents contacted the police regarding her disappearance. Word went around town that she was missing, word that soon reached the boys who kidnapped her. They argued over letting her go or killing her and disposing of the body. And so one of the boys came up with an appalling, shrewd plan. With the same threats of having her family killed, they made Junko call her parents by phone, telling them she had run away, but was safe with friends and that the police should stop investigating her whereabouts. Whenever Nobuhiro's parents came over to check on their son, Hiroshi forced Junko to act like his girlfriend. But since Nobuhiro's parents were well aware of Hiroshi's status as a Yakuza and were terrified of him, it wasn't a pretense he had kept up for long. Nobuhiro's brother also seemed to be aware that Junko was being held captive and did absolutely nothing about it out of fear of the Yakuza reprisal. Junko was kept as a Yakuza prisoner for over 40 days and nights, and over the course of this period she was beaten, tortured, indecently assaulted by more than 100 other Yakuza members that Hiroshi had invited over. They starved her, hung her from the ceiling, and used her as a human punching bag. They dropped barbells onto her stomach, forced her to eat live cockroaches, and drink her own urine. She was also forced to dance and sing songs while being beaten before forced to commit numerous lewd acts. On some occasions, she was cut open and objects were inserted into the wounds, some of which included a lit light bulb and ignited fireworks. Junko was burned with cigarettes and lighters, and hot wax was stripped onto her eyelids to seal them shut. The boys also tore off her left nipple with pliers and pierced her breast with sewing needles. Whenever she passed out from the pain, the boys dumped her head in a bucket of cold water that kept her at the ready, keeping her awake so that the torture could continue. By the end of 40 days, Junko had been beaten so hard and for so long that her face was almost unrecognizable. And as a result of the repeated violations, she had become pregnant. 16 days into Junko's ordeal, Horishi invited a boy named Koichi Ihara around to the house. Koichi postured as a tough young prospective Yakuza, but was actually horrified by what he saw, how Junko was being treated. When it was his turn to violate her, Koichi found that he didn't have it in him to commit such an atrocious act. He was mocked by the other boys who bullied him into going through with it, questioning his masculinity and telling him that if he didn't assault her, that he would be kept prisoner too, doomed to suffer similar treatment. Traumatized by what he'd seen and racked with guilt over the things he'd done, Koichi confessed his crimes to his brother as soon as he arrived back at his home. The police were soon contacted, and 2 officers were dispatched to the house where Junko was being kept a prisoner. When they arrived at the address, Hiroshi and Nobuhiro played dumb, acting outraged that such an accusation had been made. They even had the gall to invite the officers inside to take a look around, calling their bluff in a way that seemed absolutely outrageous in retrospect. To the police officers, the invitation was all the proof they needed to believe that the 2 boys were telling the truth and that there were no crimes being committed inside the house. If they had bothered to search, Junko would still be alive today, as it is widely accepted that despite some serious mental trauma, she would have recovered from the wounds inflicted on her and gone on to live something of a relatively normal life. But as the month of December rolled around, Junko actually found the courage to sneak downstairs to the telephone to call the police. But to her horror, Hiroshi discovered her trying to summon help, smacking her away from the phone and slamming the headset down into the receiver. When the police dispatcher called back, Hiroshi apologized, informed them that the call was an accident, and told the police not to worry. Hiroshi was furious that Junko had attempted to contact the police and savagely beat her as punishment for the perceived offense. At one point during this particularly savage assault, Hiroshi doused Junko's legs with lighter fluid and set them on fire. Junko was in so much pain that she actually started having a seizure, but the boys believed she was faking it to gain sympathy and set her legs on fire all over again. It was about this point in her captivity that Junko reportedly asked her captors to kill her so that her suffering might be over with, but they mocked her for this request and refused, thinking of more imaginative ways to torture her, such as forcing her to sleep outside at night when temperatures would dip below 0. Somehow, despite being on the verge of death, Junko didn't die of hypothermia. But by the time the torture got that severe, it was having a catastrophic effect on her body. Weeks of abuse had caused Junko to lose control of her bladder and bowels, but she was only beaten harder when she urinated on the floor. She was also rendered incapable of drinking water or consuming food, and would vomit profusely after each attempt. But again, instead of slowing down or attempting medical aid, Hiroshi and his minions only beat her harder from making a mess. Such sustained beatings and torture also had a horrific effect on her personal appearance too. Her face became so swollen that she barely resembled a human being anymore, and her body was so crippled and affected from untreated wounds that she started giving off a sickly, rotting scent that caused Hiroshi and his friends to lose any kind of carnal interest in her. On January 4th, 1989, after a humiliating loss during a game of Mahjong, Hiroshi hurried to take his frustrations out on Junko. Taking place over the course of 2 hours. This was perhaps the most brutal, sustained, and cruel beating that she had ever been subjected to, and the details are honestly not worth going into. Given how vile the previous assaults on Junko were, you can imagine how despicable this last one was, and as a result, Junko finally succumbed to her wounds and died later that day. When the boys discovered that she was dead, they wrapped her body in bed sheets and stuffed what remained of her into a travel bag. They then shoved her body into a 55-gallon drum and poured wet concrete into it, driving the drum out into a suburb of Tokyo before dumping it in a secluded area. A few weeks later, on January 23rd, Hiroshi was visited by Japanese police officers and arrested. But as it turns out, this is for an assault on a different girl than Junko, one that had occurred back in December of the previous year. The officers then bluffed Hiroshi into thinking that they knew he committed more serious crimes, and out of the blue, he suddenly confessed to the killing of Junko and told them where they could find her body. Horrified by the impromptu confession, the police drove out to the secluded spot that Hiroshi had described and found the steel drum that contained Junko's body. Her hands were so badly burned that she couldn't be identified by her fingerprints. So many of her teeth had been knocked out that the police initially didn't think she could be identified by her dental records. But a partial match turned out to be enough to confirm that the body did in fact belong to the missing Junko Furuta. In light of the fact that they were juveniles at the time of the offense, the identities of all those confirmed were kept a closely guarded secret by the Japanese courts. However, outraged by the severity of the crime, journalists worked hard to uncover their names and subsequently published them in the national newspapers. The reasoning was that no one who could commit such horrific acts of carnal violence deserved to remain anonymous, and that they should be named and shamed for the horrendous things they've done. Not only did Hiroshi Miyano deny that he'd actually murdered Junko, only pleading guilty to the crime of committing bodily injury that resulted in death, but when he was finally convicted of murder in July of 1990, he actually appealed the sentence. Appalled by such a juvenile and cowardly display from Hiroshi, Tokyo's High Court Judge Ryuichi Yanase not only denied the appeal, but gave Hiroshi an additional 3 years on top of his original 17, publicly scolding him for his apparent lack of remorse. During Hiroshi's trial, the High Court judge commented that exceptionally grave and atrocious violence had been inflicted upon the victim, and that Junko Furuta had been murdered so brutally that her soul must be wandering in torment. Upon hearing the details of the brutal assault and torture that ended her life, a spectator in the gallery actually passed out from the shock. Junko's mother also reportedly had a complete mental breakdown when she learned of her daughter's treatment, which required intense psychiatric treatment to overcome. Hiroshi's parents were so ashamed by the whole ordeal that they sold their home and donated the fee of almost $500,000 to Junko's mother and father. Junko's funeral was held on April 2nd, 1989. One of her friends read a memorial piece that stated, "Jun-san, welcome back. I have never dreamed that we would see you again in this way. He must have been in so much pain. There must have been so much suffering. The traditional coat we all made for the school festival looked really good on you. We will never forget you. I have heard that the headmaster has presented you with a graduation certificate. So we graduate together, all of us. June Chan, there is no more pain for you now. No more suffering. Please rest in peace. The electronics retailer that was due to give Junko a job upon graduation presented her parents with a uniform that she would have worn during her employment, along with sincere condolences. They placed the uniform in her casket, saying it's what she would have wanted, given how proud she was that she'd secured such a prestigious position at such a young age. What happened to her is something that the Yakuza subject young women to far more regularly than will ever be publicized. You get that the Yakuza are still romanticized in a similar way of how the Italian-American mob had been idealized in the past. We must be cautious not to put criminal organizations on the pedestal, and we must be quick to remember that it might have been our own sisters or daughters that were subjected to such horrendous treatment by men who saw Junko little more than an object that he toyed with, then disposed of. May she and all of the victims of wanton criminal violence obtain the peace and death that was denied to them in life.
I saw Stranger Things, and we often do think the way things are portrayed, but the reality is something completely different. Stranger Things is a great show with really dark themes and powers and science fiction. But what it doesn't know is how close it is to the reality of everything, and how close we are to prove them right. When the universe was created, everything was split. And so did everything in its splitting image, in order to make it simpler. Yes, the multiverse does exist, but it is not something like what films have portrayed. How do I know that? Well, because I have traveled to one called MU033, or as we call it, the Upside Down. The thing with this universe is that it is just beneath our universe, and so is basically a splitting image of our universe. But the only thing that it does not have is light. Even though this universe is basically a replica of our universe, it is completely dark, and we stumbled across it while we were dabbling out with some equations, and one with right time proved out to circulate this in quantum experiments, and I, along with 3 other scientists, toggled along the ride by the quantum bridge. The quantum bridge is the bridge between our universe and the Upside Down, and for now, it is closed. We started this experiment back in 2012, and the first success came in 2020, when us, my team and I, hung around the quantum bridge and found this universe. Upon fiddling with it, we found that there is a complete absence of light in there, so we assume it to be a lonely universe, not sacred to life. So we decided to take a peek. And as we did, we saw that the complete formation was built around darkness. And slowly, we felt like we were being consumed by it. A week into the mission, I ordered to abort it. It was too risky without probable means of light and contact. And as we were rushed back, a dark wave of fog started chasing us, and there were presence of something dark that we could feel. We panicked and started running, when one of our field scientists was engulfed by it. And sooner, it manifested the physicality and knowledge, and everything almost as if the life was thriving from that sinister manifestation. And it did. And then it engulfed another one of our scientists. It was me and Julie who made it out alive. But what still scares us, the extraction of knowledge it did from the scientists. Because when we were escaping, the dark engulfed scientist said, "We will find a way." The quantum bridge was shut, and we escaped narrowly. Now, they have the knowledge of those brilliant scientists we lost. Now, though they have no idea of building a functional quantum bridge, they do know their science, and we'll figure out a way to cross. But till then, we are on a tight clock to protect ourselves from them. And shows like Stranger Things give me a hope of victory we might just get.
It's been almost 10 years since I suffered the horrors of being stalked, and I still have nightmares about it. I remember being so bad that I was scared to take a lunch at work because he'd be just waiting in the car for me. I was too scared to even go home sometimes because on more than one occasion, he broke in and waited for me. The cops charged him for breaking and entering, but since it was his first criminal offense, he got away with just nothing but a slap on the wrist. After that, he just got creative and found other ways to psychologically torture me. I go to work and have gifts from him left at my door. I'd see him parked across the street from my house. He called any chance he could and switched up every week or so whenever I blocked a number. SIM cards and burners were just so cheap that he could easily afford to do it. One night, I was sleeping, and he somehow got into the house. I think from the garage. I'll never forget that feeling of waking up to him dragging me across my bed. That messed me up the most. I was terrified and didn't move or say a thing for what happened next. In fact, I'd rather not touch on that at all. Needless to say, after what he did, I went straight to the cops. He backed off for a while but left a flash drive on my doorstep one day. It turned out he filmed what he did to me, but it obscured his face. Let's see. I used to get the conviction because he could hit his face, but he couldn't hide certain distinct features on his body. Then match that up with him being in my apartment, and bingo. He was in prison now for a long time. This was a guy I briefly dated too. I never imagined in a million years on the first date that he'd end up being as evil as he was. But I hear people say that about some serial killers, do other real nice and charming things, until you actually get to know them. The whole ordeal had a really negative effect on my dating life. I still have trouble meeting up with new people, and if the guy acts clingy at all, I just ghost. I have done it to some pretty nice guys, to actual nice guys. I feel like they're trying to track or control me, and I just get all of those feelings of like being trapped, and then I just can't do it anymore.
While I was in the 7th grade, going from my school in the downtown area of my city to my house, the buses usually are composed of a certain constant demographic. The teenagers coming back from school, the working class adults and single mothers with their children trying to save a buck by using the bus. In addition to this demographic, there are the two types of disturbances: drug addicts or alcoholics that are loud and disruptive, usually begging for $1 in the middle-aged man, or her predator preying on middle schoolers or young women, both of which I have had my own encounters with. But today's story is not my own experience. I did have a front row seat this crazy encounter though. Now that we have the exposition, on to the story. I find a seat near the end of the bus by myself. Because of the way the buses work, there's one row on each side of the bus, with each seat has 2 sitting spaces. But there's also a twisty area in the middle of the bus. 2 seats are directly across from each other in this area. On the opposite side of me is a working class man, some teenagers behind me, and in front of me are the main characters of the story: a dingy, unshaven man and 3 teenage girls. The man being directly in front of me and the girls in the twisty seats in front of the man. Being that there's only 2 per seat, one of the girls decided to sit on one of her friend's laps to stay close and not have to sit beside a stranger. Upon seeing this, the man begins to sort of creepily laugh to himself before obnoxiously adjusting the way he's sitting in a suggestive manner, rubbing his thighs and staring the girl down. As the ride begins and the girl notices him, he starts to pat his thighs, if to suggest she sit down there. then leading to verbalize these actions, saying things like, "Come here, girl. Come sit here instead. You belong right here." Everyone inside of this disgusting behavior catches on, and they're all watching him. The girl simply scouted the man and turns away. Her friends throwing light insults at him. He attempts in vain. He turns to the working class man who's watching what's going on. He then says something along the lines of, "Why is she sitting there? She needs to be on my lap instead." Further commenting on his high schooler's body and doing the buddy-buddy arm nudge with him as if the two were pals. Just a note, she is visibly a high schooler. Our district requires standard school attire, so she has khaki shorts and button-up short-sleeve shirt with a backpack, so there's no way that this man couldn't have known that she was underage. But I digress. Anyways, hearing these outrageous statements for the man, the working class man replies with something like, "Hey, don't you ever associate with me. Whatever you think this is a child you're talking about. I come from Detroit, and we put people like you in the dirt." The man not at all deterred scoffs and does his hand-flinging motion as if to blow him off. The working class man stops his coming up, and as he stands, he tells the girl that he apologizes for what she's going through and leaves. The girl tells him on his way out, "Thank you, but I'll be able to handle it. Just kind of wait." The gross man turns back there and says, "Handle what? Handle what? Me?" and laughs to himself. I was appalled at this gross statement. But even angrier than me were the adults and male thugs who started standing in the area where the situation was, witness to this atrocity. I remember hearing the gang members all start to get riled up behind me in defense of the girl. Now this guy starts to get a bit scared. He's now stopped talking upon seeing how many people are against him. The girl again goes on to assure the crowd that she's got everything under control, and things calm down a bit. This until he pulls the string to notify the driver that he wants to leave at the next stop. In a split second, everyone's eyes were back on him. The thugs begin standing up, lingering near the doors just in case he plans to run. The bus begins to arrive to the stop, and as the man stands up, so does the girl. He attempts to walk past her, but upon approaching her, she pushes him back not to get him off his feet, but they just get back him from the forming group of people. She does this because as he stumbles backward like Django, she swings her belt off her waist and yells, "He likes to prey on little girls. He liked flirting with little girls as a grown man," and starts beating the brakes off the sky with it. And yes, she was using the metal side. My ears filled with the clinking of metal on his body and head, the slapping of the leather on the skin, and the moans and cries of this fall. The grown man who is now on the ground in tears attempting to escape from this well-deserved beating. The bus ends up completely stomping the driver, running back to separate the two. The girl is still beating the man with all her might as the bus driver rushes over to pick her up and pull her away from the man. The man ends up crawling hands and knees off the bus, where he then laid on the concrete moaning and crying in pain. Everyone was escorted off the bus, and the police were soon called to get the man medical attention. And the police ended up detaining the girl, and I couldn't find any information about her charges. But I hope wherever she is, she's having a good day. As for the man, all I can say is just don't be a creep, and bad things won't happen to you. I admire that girl's bravery and the passengers that bonded together for the safety of the girl with the best demonstration of what a community should be that I've ever seen.
I went on a date with a Hinge guy once, who right in the middle of it said he had to stop off at his apartment because he forgot his wallet. This is as we're inexplicably moving from one coffee shop to another one that just happened to be on the same route as his apartment. He asked me if I wanted to come inside, just in case he's searching for a while, and since he's been perfectly nice and non-threatening so far, I didn't see any reason not to. Then as we get into his TV room, he ends up pulling me down onto his beanbag and trying to make out with me. He didn't do it a super aggressive way, so much as he was like trying to be sexy, who was not. Then I called him out on it. He said he was just messing around, but I was so turned off at that point that I ended up just getting up and walking home a few minutes later. He texted me a few times trying to apologize and assure me that it was a joke, but I don't know. It was so cringy that I just couldn't get past it. Fast forward to a year later, and I had read on the local news site that he was arrested on suspicion of killing and assaulting of a woman after the woman that he had been on a date with complained to the police that he had held her up against her will. Apparently, when she tried to leave, he held her captive in his apartment and beat her and assaulted her. He could have faced life in prison, but after just 6 years in prison, he might actually get out this year if parole goes well. 6 years. He should be in prison for the rest of his life, and sometimes I wonder how close I came to being the one tied up in his basement.
In the early 20th century, Markia Sarenko escaped from her home country of Russia, feeling the bloodthirsty Bolsheviks who were in the process of turning their native land into the political wasteland that was the USSR. She escaped over the border to China, who at the same time had yet to be consumed by communism as a temporary stopover on her way to the United States. However, it was in China that the superstitious Maria consulted a fortune teller, wishing to get a good idea of what her journey had in store for her. The Chinese fortune teller gave Maria some very good news indeed, telling her that not only would she successfully make it to the United States, but that she would give birth to a daughter whose beauty would become globally renowned. But under all circumstances, she should avoid so-called dark waters. Then, after making it all the way to San Francisco, Maria gave birth to a daughter on July 20th, 1938, naming her Natalia Nikolaevna Zarenko. Natalia would gain the fame that the fortune teller had predicted, but would be known by another name entirely. That name was Natalie Wood. Natalie's mother essentially groomed her for stardom from the time she learned to walk and talk. She sent her to singing, dancing, and acting lessons, training her to be a complete triple threat, before parading her around movie studios in the hopes that she would be discovered, and thus fulfill her destiny. It was such an intensive experience that it verged on abuse. Natalia's mother was utterly ruthless and unforgiving, separating her from her sister and even denying her medical assistance for injuries in the instance that this would only make her stronger. Maria paid close attention to the prophetic warnings of the fortune teller, too, and made an effort to give Natalia a deep ingrained fear of deep water. Yet, despite her efforts, the fortune teller's predictions almost came true on the set of a movie called The Green Promise. During shooting, a young Natalie was set to run across a bridge that was set to collapse during a rainstorm, a bridge that just so happened to run over a pool of rough, dark water. The director insisted that the timing would be just right, and although there would be an element of on-screen peril, she would be entirely safe, but terrifyingly enough, one of the set stuff happened to pull the collapse mechanism too early, and Natalie broke her wrist as she fell into the water. Her mother was distraught, believing she was about to see the prophecy of drowning come true before her very eyes. But the set staff, acting quickly, helped Natalie pull herself to safety as she struggled to do so with a broken wrist. If she wasn't terrified of water beforehand, she certainly was then. Maria refused to get her daughter any medical assistance for the broken wrist either, believing that an instance on doing so would deter directors from hiring her in the future. The injury scarred her wrist so heavily that Natalie went on instead on covering the scars with multiple bracelets for the rest of her life. Not only because she believed the wound was ugly, because it reminded her of one of the most traumatic instances of her life, so traumatic that she never, ever learned to swim, and was reported to have panic attacks whenever she tried to wash her hair. Despite her traumas, Natalie had a long and successful film career, and will go on to wed fellow star Robert Wagner. They had a rocky relationship, and naturally got divorced and remarried before having their one and only daughter, Natasha. Then, during Thanksgiving weekend of 1981, Natalie Roberts and another movie star, Christopher Walken, were enjoying some rest and relaxation aboard Wagner's yacht, named the Splendor, around the Catalina Island off the coast of California. Only one other person was with them, the boat's captain, a man named Dennis Davern. They spent the weekend shopping, sunning themselves, sailing, dining out, and profusely drinking on the night of November 27, 1981, after yet another evening of heavy drinking. An argument between Natalie and Robert broke out when it grew so intense that Natalie demanded that Captain Davern take her ashore on the small dinghy that was kept on board the Splendor. The pair then spent the night in a hotel before returning to the boat the following morning, when Natalie and Robert apparently talked things out and buried the hatchet. The following night, Robert, Natalia, Captain Davern, and Christopher Walken went ashore to dine in a restaurant called Doug's Harbor Reef. Here, they continued their stint of heavy drinking, reportedly ordering 2 bottles of wine, 2 bottles of champagne, and numerous daiquiris, was one of the waiting staff reporting that they barely touched their food. The proper people were so intoxicated that the restaurant manager reportedly called harbor security to ensure that they made it back to the boat safely that night. According to Captain Davern, Robert Wagner and Christopher Walken argued violently over politics, as well as the direction that Natalie's career should take. He has since stated that the argument grew so violent that one of the men threw an empty wine bottle at the other before Natalie had to get involved to separate the pair. The argument then shifts to one between Natalie and Robert, with Natalie apparently telling Robert that she'd had enough before retiring to her room for the night at around 3:30 a.m. The next morning, on November 29th of 1981, a ship-to-shore call was made from the Splendor, one in which Captain Davern reported to the U.S. Coast Guard that Natalie Wood was missing. A search begins, one that ended just a few hours later at around 8 a.m., when Natalie Wood's drowned body is found floating near the ship's inflatable dinghy, the very same one she had used to escape the boat just 2 days prior. She was wearing nothing but a nightgown, a pair of socks, and a jacket. The autopsy showed that she had a blood alcohol content of 0.14%, almost double the legal limit for driving. There was also evidence that she had taken a rather large amount of powerful painkillers, and the time before her death. She was just 43 years old when she passed away. Amazingly, on the day she died, Robert Wagner is not intensively questioned by police. It's only a few days later that the 3 men who were on the boat that night are brought in for questioning, and when they are each tells us suspiciously similar stories that details the evening's events. As a result, Natalie's death was assumed to be nothing more than an accidental drowning. The nation was dumbstruck by such a horrible, unforeseeable tragedy, and mourned in tandem with Robert Wagner, who went on to raise their 2 daughters as a single parent. 2 daughters who are almost inconsolable, distraught at the sudden death of their beloved mother. Natalie's death seemed to remain an open and shut case for an entire 30 years, until a shocking revelation turned public attention back onto the situation. Captain Dennis Davern, the man who had been captaining the Splendor that night, broke his silence on the case and came forward to state that he had in fact lied to the investigating law enforcement. The nation was shocked to hear that the argument that night between Walken and Wagner had not actually been rooted in politics, but the suspicion that Walken had been secretly flirting with Natalie whenever Robert Wagner's back was turned. As was previously mentioned, the argument then shifted to one between Wagner and Natalie after Walken that retired to his room. But then, when Natalie had tried to do the same and retire to bed, Robert Wagner had followed her to continue the argument. Then, sometime later, Wagner stormed up to Captain Davern, sweating and panicking, and told him to turn off all the boat's lights and ignore all onshore calls that came into the boat. In the aftermath, Davern claimed that Wagner kept him confined to his quarters in order to prevent him from giving a statement to the police, then held an impromptu meeting in which he ordered Walken and Davern to keep quiet about the arguments and to essentially give false statements to the police. In light of such statements, police reopened the investigation into Natalie Wood's death in the year 2012. A re-examining of the information gleaned from her autopsy had one corner declaring that she had died as a result of drowning, but also from other undetermined factors. Then, in 2018, Wagner was officially named as a person of interest in Natalie Wood's death. Natalie's sister Alana came out and gave a media interview, stating that she believed Captain Davern's claims to be true and had even confronted Wagner on the day of Natalie's funeral in an attempt to get him to reveal what had actually happened that night. This culminated in an appearance on the popular TV show Dr. Fell, in which Lena and Davern publicly accused Wagner of being solely responsible for Natalie's death. However, Lana was keen to make it clear that she didn't believe it to be outright murder, and that she didn't believe Wagner ever really intended to kill his wife, but either because lost in his rage during a heat-in-the-moment decision, possibly denying Natalie help when she had fallen into the water while trying to leave the boat to go ashore, just as she had done just 2 nights previous. Despite the accusations from her sister, Natalie's 2 daughters, Natasha and Courtney, stand by their father's version of events, saying he had done all he could to preserve the mother's legacy. Courtney is not even Robert's biological daughter, but adores him so much that she has even taken on his surname, potentially is a sign of loyalty and respect. She personally believes and has publicly stated that Captain Davern is a fabricator, one who simply wishes to make a name for himself, exploiting her mother's death for monetary gain, and these claims do carry some weight to them. For example, Davern not only took 30 years to come forward with his accusations, but was also, by his own admission, extremely drunk on the night in question. His story is apparently changed multiple times throughout the years, leaking seedy gossip to tabloid journalists the entire time. He had also written a book about the events of the night in question, one which has been analyzed and debunked by numerous people who asserted that Davern's version of events are extremely spurious. When asked about Devon's claims, Robert's biological daughter, Natasha, was reportedly said he is somebody who I cannot even dignify with a response because he is so undignified. As for Christopher Walken, the only other person aboard the Splendor that evening, he hasn't spoken much at all about the incident, keeping suspiciously quiet over the years. When asked about how he felt regarding the reopening of the case, he reportedly said, "I don't know," having previously said that he firmly believed Natalie's death to be a tragic accident. In conclusion, it's not entirely out of the question that an extremely intoxicated Natalie might have tried to use the very same dinghy she had used a few nights previous, and doing so, she could have simply fallen into the water and drowned while the other people on board were either too drunk to respond to her cries or simply below deck and unable to hear her entirely. Yet, it's also scarcely feasible that a jealous husband had discovered her infidelities, either perceived or real, thrown her into the sea in a rage, and simply used his influence or outright threats to cover up the murder. It has been 39 years since Natalie's tragic death, and we are still no closer to knowing the entire truth as to what happened to her that night. And it's not only her family and friends that deserve concrete answers, but society as a whole. Have we had a murderer walking among the Hollywood elite for the past 40 years or so? Or has an innocent man been subjected to a campaign of slander when he should have been given room to heal? Whatever happened that Thanksgiving weekend, one thing is painfully clear, that the dark prophecy told to Maria Zakharhenko by the Chinese fortune teller in the early 20th century did actually come true. And it was indeed dark waters that became the undoing of the young woman who came to be known to the world as Natalie Wood.
It happened last year between Christmas and New Year's Eve. I'm from the French Caribbean, so it's not unusual to scuba dive during Christmas holidays. My family and I, a 25-year-old female, booked a few dives. They're all really good scuba divers, better than me. They passed a few scuba diving levels that allowed them to participate in way more technical dives than I'm allowed to do. I enjoy scuba diving as well. I'm able to do almost every casual dive, but I don't feel safe diving without an instructor. Yet even more, if it's a dive with decompression stops required. If anyone isn't familiar with scuba diving, here's a quick explanation. You can dive safely into a certain depth before the pressure becomes dangerous. If you dive below that point, which is roughly 20 meters or 65 feet, you have to do decompression stops during your ascent. It means that you have to stop while going back to the surface at a certain time to let your body adapt itself to the pressure. If you rise up too quickly, you may catch decompression sickness, which can lead, in a worst case scenario, to death. So we decided that I could manage a little private lesson with my instructor first, prior to more exciting dives with my family. So the first day, my family was enjoying a dive on a technical spot that I wasn't feeling up to, while I was alone with my instructor and retrieving my old scuba diving reflexes. Everything went okay. We were on a beautiful coral reef. There were many beginners on the boats. I was by far the more experienced here. So finally, my instructor decided that he could manage me with another student who was truly a beginner. After small briefing with safety rules and hand signs, which is the only way to communicate underwater, we began our descent. I quickly retrieved all my old reflexes and was enjoying myself going back and forth to the instructor and the beginner diver for at least 20 minutes. Everything was perfect besides one thing. It was a windy day and there was a heavy swell. It's less of a problem under the water than it is for surface swimmers. The only thing is that it requires more physical effort to swim, so my air bottle was emptying a little quicker than usual, which was normal. I signed to my instructor that I was running thin of air, and he nodded. It was at this level far from being critical. It was at this moment that I saw a young man swimming towards me. It wasn't the instructor nor its student. I've never seen him before, but he was in full scuba diving gear, and we were the only dive boat on the spot, so I assumed he was with us. And I just didn't pay any attention to him on the boat. He was swimming fast towards me and then signaled to me that he was out of air. When a failure happens while scuba diving, there is a very strict procedure. You have to help the person with no questions asked, because every second is vital. You find on underwater gear you have breathing devices, regulators, octopus, I'm not sure about the English word, a main device, and a spare device. So I handed the guy my spare breathing device, which means that we were both breathing with my gear, consuming twice as much air as I was consuming alone. I waited till the guy seemed to calm down and tried to hand sign him to go see my instructor. He nodded no and signed to me to start an ascent. I understand this procedure. I was a little low on air, above the decompression stop level, so the right thing to do was going up to the surface before having an air failure. I had to tell my instructor first. This guy was very reluctant, which was strange. It would have taken us like 30 seconds to tell the instructor, and he would have started an ascent with us. During this time, I was panicking at seeing my own level going down, and I saw that our instructor was staring at us quizzically and swimming towards us. It was at this moment that the guy let go of my spare air device and started swimming away, breathing again in his own breathing device. I was totally lost and started my ascent with my instructor. Once at the surface, because of the tides, I was feeling dizzy and nauseous, so my bizarre encounter wasn't the first thing that I debriefed. It was after I calmed down and the boat was driving us toward the beach without the strange guy that I asked my instructor about what happened. I don't know, maybe a guy who lost his group and needed some time to calm down. They replied, "Okay." Why did he tell me that he was out of air though? My instructor told me that I probably misunderstood his hand signal, and that he was probably not telling me he was having an air failure because he left breathing in his own device. I'm sure I saw him do the air failure sign, but it was okay, I guess. The next day, I joined my family during my dive, and the instructor was different. It was a girl this time, Charlie. I've had time to think about that guy, and I was worried about him. So I told everything that happened to Charlie and asked her if she knew the guy and if he was okay, because I didn't see him going back to the surface. She asked me to describe him, which I did. She told me, "Oh, that's Marvin. Don't worry about him. He's preparing himself to become a scuba diving instructor. Every time he has a day off from the restaurant, he's working here. He asked us to dive him on the coral reef that morning and to pick him up in the afternoon. I ate at his restaurant this noon, saw him. I was feeling relieved and told myself that it was just a comprehension issue with Marvin. The rest of the week went without any incident. I was doing more and more technical dives, and everything went very smoothly. Charlie was a wonderful instructor, and I never saw Marvin again. That is, until the last dive. It was on New Year's Eve. We planned the best dive on that day. It was on a shipwreck, and I felt trained enough to try it without my instructor. Just my family and I. And it was Charlie's day off. It was fairly deep for a beginner like me. 30 meters at its down point, around 98 feet. My first day male instructor was there and told us that he would be exploring the shipwreck too. So we would cross him and help me if he saw that I needed it. It was very comforting to know, and my family felt comforted when I told them that. So we began our descent and started swimming around the shipwreck. We crossed our old instructor twice, but every time I signed him that everything was okay. It was at that moment that I saw Marvin swimming toward me. At this moment, I was about 5 to 10 meters above my down point, but still staying under my decompression stop level. I was a little surprised, and even more surprised when he signaled me again that he was out of air. I was distrustful, but if there was any chance that it would be true, I couldn't not help him. So I handed him my spare breather. But this time, I had a lot of air left, so it wasn't really an issue. He took it, started breathing it in, and took my arm. I reached to see his air level instruments, but he prevented me from seeing it. Then he signed me to start in descent with him. I immediately signed no. I wasn't at my deepest when he reached, but I have been deeper during this time, and I've had a decompression stop to do. I saw that my father saw us, and he quickly looked away, probably not understanding what was going on. I tapped at my diving computer device, which calculates when and how long to decompress to signify it to him. He shrugged, smiled at me, and started swimming up, still holding me. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, and the thing that helped me react was that my diving computer was telling me to stop and decompress now. I then understood that I was in danger, and that if I'd let him do what he wanted, I would die from the bends. I then started screaming, only to remember that no noise can be heard underwater. I started wiggling frantically as I saw my father and sister way below me, my diving computer alerting me more and more intensely. At that moment, my father saw us and he reacted. He swam very quickly toward us, and I managed to hit the guy as my dad grabbed my ankle and suddenly dragged me deeper. The guy then quickly swam away. My dad dragged me deeper again, and then we waited for a long decompression stop to ensure that I would be okay. Then he started heading towards the surface very slowly and cautiously. Once we reached the surface, I started crying frantically and went back to the boat. My father then told me that he thought Marvin was my old instructor, and this was why he wasn't surprised at first. I then told it to my old instructor, who took it more seriously this time, and told me to show him Marvin when we would go up to the surface. Thing is, he never did. The next day on New Year's, we went one last time to the scuba diving club because my little sister had a diploma to collect. We saw Charlie still choked up. I told her what happened with Marvin, and then she stiffened. She told me that Marvin was at the restaurant yesterday for New Year's Eve, and he didn't go scuba diving, which means that this guy wasn't Marvin. And to this day, I still don't know who he is, or what he wanted, or why he tried to kill me. Maybe twice.
This is hands down the most horrifying thing that's ever happened to me. I still don't have any answers as to why it happened either, and I probably never will. I had recently graduated college. I was a marketing major, and I was having a hard time finding a job. I didn't have anything lined up for me right after I graduated like some of my peers. So, I did what most people do, and moved back in with my parents. Not gonna lie, it was pretty weird moving back in after having been away for so long. For as long as I can remember, it was just me and my dog. And now I was living with my mom and dad again. It sucked. I normally don't talk about this very much, but when I was younger, I had a natural intuition that most people don't have. I had some kind of ability to speak to ghosts, or at the very least, to see them. I was that kid that was talking to the wall and claimed to be talking to a ghost. I had no idea why I had this ability. but I knew that I did, and remember genuinely feeling a sense and making a connection with it. I always had to make some kind of spiritual or emotional connection with it before I was able to communicate with it. It's really weird to explain, but I can still do it. The ability never went away. It's a little more difficult now, but so I became very interested in it, especially towards the end of my college career. I spent many nights meditating and trying to form connections with spirits around me. So here's the thing. My parents had actually moved when I was in college. I never really felt a strong connection to their new home. Honestly, I didn't really like it, and I had never spent more than a couple of nights there. Even during the summer, I would stay at my apartment in the city only because, well, why not? And again, you can see why it was so weird for me and my dog to move back into my parents' house, because I've never really lived in this house. It's not that it was particularly negative or anything, but anyone who is in tune with their mind and body and moves around a lot will remember that it is distressing. Even if there's nothing problematic about it, you can be 100% financially, spiritually, physically secure and fine in every aspect of your life. Moving into a new home will invariably cause some distress. That was one Friday night when my parents had gone out for dinner. They wanted to have a night away from all the regular worries of day-to-day life. I had two other brothers, and they're both in high school, so you can understand what my parents who need a break. My brother being my brothers both went out to sleep over to friends' house. They only had a year between them, so they hung out in the same friend group. And they all had this weird thing where they would sleep over at each other's houses and just play video games all night. That's left me and my dog, Dory, and home alone, until my parents got home at least. And I remember feeling really freaked out. Not in a crazy way or anything, but something just felt off. Like there was something in the air. It was really hard to explain. I remember being in my room reading an article on the best ways to get a job. It was about 9 o'clock at night. My parents probably wouldn't be home until about 11 or 12. I remember being really into this one article. I was taking notes on things that I could do to improve my resume. And then I heard it. My dog needs one really weird noise. It was almost like a bark, but also a whimper. I knew something was wrong because he very rarely made noises. I rushed downstairs to see what was going on. He was sitting there, perfectly fine, as if nothing had happened. And this was extremely unusual. I looked around the house frantically. He had food. He'd just gone to the bathroom, and nothing around the house seemed to be out of place. I chalked up to him not liking being at my parents' house. It sounded rational enough. I made my way back upstairs to get back into the job hunting grind. And then I heard the very same noise again, maybe 15 minutes later. And this time, it really unnerved me. This was very out of behavior for my dog, and I had an odd sense of impending doom. I ran downstairs and looked around for a minute there. I didn't even see my dog. I didn't know where he was. I called out the Dory, but he didn't answer. Then I made the worst discovery of my entire existence. I realized that my dog was dead. He was just lying on the floor, motionless. It was so weird because he was only about 2 or 3 years old. I closely examined his body and didn't appear as if he had even been in a fight or a struggle of some kind. No blood, no bruises, no puncture wounds. It was as if he had just laid down to take a nap and died. I remember feeling really sad. That sense of fear and adrenaline never went away though. I waited for my parents to get home. I was really psyched out, and I didn't know what else I could even do. I felt like calling the police was a bit too extreme,
And I didn't want to be the college graduate turned adult who moves back in with their parents for a week and needs them to rush home because he's scared. And this all happened a while back. I still can't explain how my dog died. I ended up landing a job a couple of days later in a nearby city, and I was really happy to have been moved out of that house. It freaked me out pretty bad. And after an incident like that, my parents can visit me any time in the future. For decades now, those huddled around their campfires on dark Virginia nights have shared a tale that has made their companions blood run cold. Is the story of an escaped insane asylum patient, a man committed for the cold-blooded murder of his own family on Easter Sunday. Following his incarceration, he became obsessed with Easter-modified motifs, eggs, crucifixes, and most importantly, rabbits. Because following his freak escape from the psychiatric hospital, he was interred at our family killer escape into the woods around Colchester Overpass near Clifton, Virginia, where he found his only stable resource of food was rabbit meat. Over time, the escaped mental patient collected the skins of the rabbit he killed, somehow stitching them together in something that resembled a huge gore-stained rabbit costume. Anyone unlucky enough to stray into his patch of the woods found themselves subjected to the terrifying ordeal of being chased to the trees by an axe-wielding fursuited psychopath that soon came to be known as the Bunny Man. But despite the fact that the Bunny Man sounds like nothing but bone-chilling urban legend, the terrifying reality is there's much more truth than the story than we'd like to admit. Clifton wasn't always the vibrant suburban sprawl that it is now. At the beginning of the 20th century, it was a small and humble farming community centered around the towns of the railway station. But as Clifton grew and its population swelled, the residents became unhappy that they were so close to a state insane asylum. The solution was simple. The local government passed a measure to shut the asylum down, and the inmates being temporarily housed in the newly built Lorton prison. However, during transport, one inmate managed to wrestle free from prison guards and escape into some nearby woodland. The prisoner's name was Douglas Griffin. In a matter of record that a man by the name was convicted of murder by his own parents with an axe on Easter morning when he was just 12 years old. And his hearing, young Douglas seemed manic and deranged, completely absorbed by the Easter imagery present in his home on the day he killed his own mother and father. A judge spared no time and committed him to an insane asylum, and that's where he lived for 20 long years, right up until the day of his escape. Federal marshal, local law enforcement, and a handful of volunteers searched the woods near the site of Griffin's escape for months on end, using sniffer dogs, professional trackers, and even mounted patrols. But the only traces they found the FEM were the mutilated corpses of several half-eaten rabbits. By October of that year, Douglas Griffin was assumed dead, with law enforcement refusing to believe that he could have survived out in the woods for that long. But after 3 teenagers went missing, the search for them brought police officers right back to the very same area they've been hunting Douglas Griffin. And then one night, bloodhounds looking for the kids led officers to a small bridge with a rail line at the top and a road running under the bridge. Hanging from the bridge were the missing teens' decision bowed like the rabbits in the woods. The teens had apparently been walking home and had stumbled across Griffin hiding under the bridge. Moments after making the gruesome discovery, police officers heard a maniacal laughter coming from above them. Looking up to see a man in a rabbit's firm mask waving an axe above his head. Police then claimed that Griffin was hit by an oncoming train, although whether or not that's true or just an excuse for their failure to capture him, it's impossible to discern. But that didn't stop local newspapers from pumping out stories detailing the grisly deeds of the Bunny Man of Clifton. As far as I can tell, the Bunny Man legend appears to have started in the 1970s but has its roots in unrelated real-life events. On the night of October 8, 1970, Air Force Cadet Robert Bennett and his fiancée were driving near Colchester Bridge when Robert spotted something in the middle of the road that had him slamming on his brakes to avoid hitting it. There was a man, and what appeared to be a full-bodied gray suit on there was completely, with as Robert put it, something that looked a lot like bunny ears. The couple simply stared at the figure, dumbstruck, until they noticed the large hatchet in his hand, at which point they drove off again at high speed. Though neither Robert nor his fiancée were hurt, they were shaken by the incident and couldn't provide a lot of details. But with his pale outfits and ear-like head covering, Benetton police initially speculated that the man was a member of the KKK. The mysterious figure was quickly dubbed the Bunny Man by local newspapers, and it wasn't long before there was a second sighting. Less than 2 weeks later, a construction site security guard making his rounds in a new housing development caught the Bunny Man using an axe to smash the roof supports of new houses being built. After the newspaper ran the story, the Bunny Man called the local authorities, saying that he was against the spread of new housing divisions into his woods. Based on his voice and eyewitness accounts, police determined the Bunny Man was a local teen upset with the new housing development. He told police that he would meet them at the Colchester Bridge on Halloween, but never showed it was never seen again. The events were reported in the newspaper around the country, and teens from all over Virginia started to make their way to Colchester Bridge to look for the Bunny Man. Over 50 Bunny Man sightings were reported everywhere, from Maryland to Washington, D.C., though not a single sighting could be corroborated. The supernatural elements of the Bunny Man story only came when locals connected the Bunny Man news reports to an unsolved murder of a local girl that happened in 1918. 14-year-old Eva Roy was found beaten to death and hung near Colchester Bridge, and the prime suspect was an escaped mental patient who broke out of Lorton Prison, though he was eventually proved innocent of the crime. As years passed, the legend spread. Teens near the bridge would go on Bunny Man hunts in the woods, especially near Halloween. It seems horrifying that such a ridiculous-sounding story can have so many elements of truth to it. Just makes you wonder, how many other stories, myths, or legend that we're so quick to dismiss as false are actually based on terrifying, real-life events?
Everybody is familiar with the curse of La Llorona, but only a few know about the curse of Dahlia, one curse that has haunted the people of Kentucky for generations and has made them hate Easter like nothing else. It all began in 1905 in the countryside of Kentucky, when Dahlia, a local woman, invited everyone to her Easter lunch. Dahlia was a local woman living alone. Her husband died in the war, and her children died of hay fever. She was all alone now and was very active in her community, helping out everyone she could. She would find her happiness in the happiness of all the other children in the community. And then one day, everything around her changed for the worst. One Easter morning, Dahlia invited all the children in her community to come and have an Easter egg hunt, and even prepared them all their favorite foods and delicacies. After doing the Easter egg hunting, she called all the children for the Thanksgiving lunch. Their parents were very well acquainted with Dahlia, and everyone trusted her, so they all trusted her and sent their kids. The community had little over 20 kids in the community, and everyone was equally loved and cared for by Dahlia. Every single child had something they loved on the table, made especially for them. They all started the lunch, and it all went pretty great. The evening was set, and the Easter party was finished. Everyone thanked Dahlia and went back to their homes. Even the parent thanked Dahlia for taking such good care of their children. The whole town went back to sleep on that Easter night. It was around 1 a.m. of the same night, and there was an eerie night silence felt all over the town. Even a cracking leaf couldn't put a dent in it. But it was the wailing sounds from Maxwell's house that broke the eerie silence. It was their son, Theodore. The blood was profusely dripping out of his mouth, and he died choking on it. Their neighbors rushed to help them, when another house in the neighborhood woke up to a wailing parent, and then it started. The whole town was filled with nothing but wailing sounds, and it was one of the worst things one could have encountered at that time. The whole neighborhood was in a rush of emergency and despair, as one by one, all the children in the neighborhood were dying. By the time it was 5 in the morning, the whole town had turned into a big graveyard. Every child in the community was now dead. Some died in their sleep, and some died trying to get to their parents. The morning sun brought them chaos and darkness. Every single child that attended the Easter party Dahlia was now dead. They all died with blood coming out of their mouth. They were furious, and they went to confront Dahlia and barged into her home, telling her what happened. Dahlia was distraught to hear the news, and she pleaded that she wasn't guilty of the crime. But the townspeople were not ready to hear her case, and they blamed her for poisoning the food of their children. The people in the community were filled with rage and anger, and warned her about the consequences her action will now bring upon her. A large funeral was held for all the children. It was probably one of the gravest days the town has ever witnessed. The town had no evidence against Dahlia, and the leftovers were tested for the poison. No poison was found in any of her foods, and she was cleared by the police. Dahlia was now an outcast in her place, and was haunted and devastated by what had happened. The whole community stopped speaking to her. Sooner, the rumors of her being a witch started to spread, and people started linking her to the satanic cults that were prevalent in those years. Some even say that she was associated with the witches that were burnt alive in Salem witch trials. And so started the long rumor of Dahlia being a witch. As time passed by, people started bullying her, and because of total social exclusion, she started becoming more and more grumpy, but was still very traumatized by it all. It was the first year since the death, and Easter morning was upon the grieving community. The whole town came together and decided to conspire against Dahlia and make her pay for what she did. On the night of the Easter, the whole town gathered around Dahlia's house, and they all decided to put the end to all her witchcraft. 4 men went barging into her house and woke up her and dragged her out by her hair and brought her in the front porch of her house. The whole community was now gathered in the front lawn. As they dragged her out, 4 more men came in with the cross and without hesitation started crucifying her on it. They took the nails and hammered them over her wrists. Dahlia was crying and pleading to let her go, but everyone was furious. Every single father and every single mother of the deceased children were out there, eagerly watching her, cheering and shouting, "Crucify the witch! Crucify the witch!" Now Dahlia was crucified, and there she stood on the front porch of her home while one of the fathers poured gasoline all over. And as they all gathered around to see her confess one time, one of the mothers said, "Just confess, and maybe we will let you go." Dahlia was not crying anymore, and there was no pain stronger than the pain of betrayal and mistrust, the pain she had already felt. She looked at all of them and smiled. "You are crucifying me, accusing me of being someone I'm not, and I did not kill those children. I loved them, and when I will stand by the Lord above, everyone will see that I am of purest intentions. Once you realize that, you'll remember all the good and all the help I gave. And that is when the curse will hit you." The angry father torched the whole house, and she got burnt right there with the house. But not a single scream was heard. The house was burnt to the bones, just like Dahlia, and all that was left was the skeletons. And so the life moved on for the community, and the house became a haunted, vacant moment of sadness and betrayal. A betrayal felt by both the community and Dahlia. After 2 years, the reports from one of the child's postpartum concluded that the source of the poisons, a candy, and that candy matched that of the local candy owner. It was him that poisoned the candy. One of the witnesses confirmed that the local store owner did buy them all candy for Easter, and upon pressing, he did confess doing that. And it was this when the whole community realized that they accused and punished to the one person, and that too, a person who cared, loved their children. The grief of their loss was now turned into remorse, and all they could feel was guilt and sadness. They all started blaming each other, and the unrest of blame and remorse haunted the town. And on the next Easter, when the town remembered the horrific events, something abnormal started happening. One of the fathers who torched Dahlia hanged himself. And in the next 4 days, all the 4 men who crucified Dahlia killed themselves. And every day for the next few days, every single man that ever accused Dahlia of murders and witchcraft hanged themselves. The whole town was now becoming a big graveyard, and all that was left were the women, the distraught and devastated women who had no clue about the extent of the curse, just roaming the streets, helpless and deranged. The whole town was rendered empty when the psychiatric institution heard of the town, and all the women were admitted. Along the time, all of these women died, except Miss Hopkins. Miss Hopkins was the local nurse in her time, and she was the one who first talked about the curse. The relevance or presence of the curse of Dahlia is still a big question in the town, but the records and history do suggest that something paranormal was afoot there. Last year, after a blissful first year of living in a new apartment, all on my own for the first time, a man moved in next door that I will never forget. The layout of the apartment is crucial to understand this incident, so I made a little diagram floor plan taken from the closest thing I could find online and edited. The most important part is that my balcony and his balcony are only partially separated by a wall, and there is a solid 2-foot gap in which you can easily walk from one to the other. For context, I previously had a very lonely woman living next door for the entire first year I lived there, who never crossed this balcony threshold without being explicitly invited. I only throw this in there so you can understand I wasn't previously concerned about someone infiltrating my space. The first time I met this new neighbor, and he was unloading groceries from his massive truck into the assigned parking spot next to mine. As I was driving up, he and a girl I assumed to be his girlfriend were unloading boxes from Costco. I noticed them speaking, and as soon as I was out of the car, they went silent. I nodded to them, proceeded to the elevator, and the guy ran up behind me, threw some boxes down, and begged me to wait. No problem, I'm a good neighbor. While in the elevator, the girlfriend refuses to make eye contact or speak to me. A little weird, but I just thought she was shy. But he quickly introduced himself and was extremely chatty. In the 45 seconds it takes to get the floor where our apartments are, He asked how I liked the place, where I was from, and where I worked. Looking back, his enthusiasm was a little strange, but I chalked it up to him being excited to be in a new place. For the sake of the rest of this story, we'll call him Sam. Sam was maybe 33, 6 foot tall, with a slim muscular build, and had hair bust extremely short as if the mask is balding. Pretty average looking by all accounts. The first few weeks we run into each other often and always make small talk, and always refers to me as Miss. I assume it's because he forgot my name but wanted to be polite. I almost never see his girlfriend after the first night, but occasionally I can hear him talking to a lady in his apartment as the walls are reasonably thin. One night, about 3 months after Sam moved in, my boyfriend is spending the nights, and we were watching movies on the couch. It's maybe 11:30 p.m. The back of the couch is against the wall I share with Sam, and we hear some banging noise. My first thought is that him and his girlfriend must be getting it on. Boyfriend and I laugh and turn the volume up a bit to drown them out. Then, in addition to the banging, the neighbors begin to scream. We can hear objects being thrown, glass shattering. The words are muffled, but there's distinctively anger and crying going on. My boyfriend, Jim that he is, steps onto the semi-shared balcony and in his loudest voice heels over without crossing on the Sands balcony. "Everything okay in there?" The girl opens the sliding door on Sam, sight a minute or two later, and says sorry about that. So we leave it alone. I'm concerned, but we have no idea what actually happened and decide to go to bed. Big mistake, I know. I wake up around 3 a.m. to more screaming, but my boyfriend refuses to wake up, and I'm not about to take my 5-foot self to break up whatever is going on at 3 a.m. I considered calling the police, but was so drowsy, I convinced myself I dreamed it. I deeply regret that decision. The next morning, I woke up to some terrible personal news, an entirely unrelated death of a friend, and pretty much put the events of that night on the back burner. I didn't forget, but it also wasn't on my mind. Fast forward about 2 weeks. It's a warm day, and I'm outside reading a book in a robe, bra, and shorts. I'm going to chair the faces away from Sam's apartment, so I can't see his side from where I am. I'm deep in my book, when suddenly I get a tap on the shoulder. Sam is standing behind me and asked if we can talk for a second. This man has already crossed an albeit invisible line by coming on my side of the balcony, but I also can't get to my door without physically moving him aside. So I asked him what's going on. He told me it was his birthday and asked if I knew where to get some Mary Jane because I seem like a girl who knows how to have a good time as we live in a state where that stuff is legal. I told him that I'm sure Google would provide the best dispensary in the area, but I personally didn't have any. He proceeds to tell me how drunk he got last night, and at this point, I'm itching for an exit. As I start to move as if to signal I'm done talking, he reaches out from my shoulder and tells me he hit and scratched my car last night because he was driving very, very wasted. Remember his massive truck? He says all of this with a smile on his face, almost laughing. I'm surprised, but mostly when I get away from him because my creep senses are starting to tingle, and I don't want to blow up at him for hitting my car. He says he'll send me his insurance info if I give him my number, and thankfully, I knew that would be a bad call. I made a bad, nervous joke about knowing where he lived and said if the damage was bad enough, I would knock on his door to get his insurance. He counters by saying he will leave a note with his info on my door. He retreats from the balcony while also saying he'd prefer to just pay me cash and not involve insurance. I give it an hour or so, and then I head down to assess the damage. I did this because I didn't want to walk down at the same time as him and risk having him follow me. Sure enough, there are 2 long new scratches on the driver's door and knock deep, just kind of superficial or worthy of a call to insurance immediately. I really just didn't want to get involved with him in any way, so I decided I could deal with the scratches. But this little event has kind of shaken me. At this point, I knew something was off with him. Nothing unusual happens as far as I'm aware this night. The next day is Saturday, And as I had to work the next day, I'm home alone, watching some action, a movie, and it's around 11 p.m. I'm on the sofa with my cat curled up on me, and the movie is relatively loud. So it takes me a little while to register this banging noise coming from the hallway of my apartment building. I honestly only noticed because my cat had woken up and got all puffed up and freaked out. I turned down the volume of the film, and suddenly, the banging is getting louder and louder. And just as I stand up, I hear the 5 words no one wants to hear coming from their door. Open up. It's the police. My stomach dropped to the floor. I had lied to Sam the day before. I totally did have some ganja on me, and I had smoked a joint outside on the balcony, the part furthest away from Sam's maybe 20 minutes before. I'm totally panicked, high as a kite, and trying to control my breathing so I don't immediately come off as suspicious before I answer the door. I remember checking the people to see a close-up of a cop's face, and then open the door, coming face to face with 6 officers, all with guns drawn. I'm about 0.5 seconds away from completely peeing my pants in fear, still convinced I'm somehow in trouble for smoking a joint. The officer who seems to be in charge can sense instantly the level of panic, and he says, "Ma'am, you're not in trouble. We need to speak with you about your neighbor. Can we come in?" At this point, I'm reeling, and my whole being is tense. I let the cops in, but my heart hasn't moved from my throat. The policeman in charge asked me about any interactions with Sam. I told them I barely know him, that he just lives next door, moved in a few months ago. I asked why they needed to be in my apartment. I'm scared, but also I don't typically get along with cops, and I have the right to know why 6 of them practically waved their guns in my face. The lead officer proceeds to tell me that Sam was a bad guy. He apparently beat his girlfriend so bad the night prior that she's now in the ICU for her injuries. They also told me Sam had a gun and had barricaded himself in the apartment next to mine. They said they had spoken to my building manager and knew my place had access to his balcony, and they needed to use it. Then they asked me to go into the bedroom and lock the doors and turn the lights off. The next 30 to 45 minutes were complete torture. In my panic, I left my cell phone on the kitchen counter and had to sit in my room, just listening to the commotion. No shots were ever fired, but there was a lot of yelling and what sounded like things being thrown. Eventually, after what felt like a lifetime, the main officer knocked on my door and told me that Sam had been arrested and thanked me for letting them use my apartment. They asked me questions for maybe 15 more minutes and left. I wish this is where the story ended. There's a bit more. In the days following Sam's arrest, I became even more panicked about him coming back to the apartment building, worried about retaliation. I hadn't said anything to the police to technically incriminate him. I had proof of nothing except his word that he was the one who scratched my car, but I did tell them about the night my boyfriend and I heard them fight. About 5 days later, Sam reappeared at the building as I was coming home from work one evening. He tried to approach me, but the elevator shut just as he was running to catch it. My whole body got tense, like the feeling when you come this close to getting in a car accident but narrowly avoid it. I stayed off my balcony entirely from this point and always kept the curtains closed. We didn't speak or rarely see each other at all for another few weeks, and then had our final interaction. Sam stopped me in the parking lot one night, running after me as I was about to get on the elevator. He begged me to tell him why I let the cops in that night. I told him the honest truth, but I was stoned, didn't know what to do, and had a bad history with cops. This is all true, and again, I was concerned about him trying to retaliate. He then got pretty upset and kept trying to repeat the question, obviously wanting a different answer. When I couldn't give him one, he then offered me $3,000 to testify as a character witness on his behalf. Because I knew him and knew how he really treated women, I was speechless and very freaked out. He told me his hearing was the next Thursday morning, and he asked if I could show up. I was like a deer frozen in headlights for a moment. and then somehow got out of there after mumbling a string of words that were most likely incoherent. The Wednesday night before his trial, I came home from work and my cat was acting kind of weird, like something had just booked her and her tail was all puffed out. I kind of shook it off, but I noticed through the curtains that there was something taped to the outside of my sliding glass door. Apparently, Sam had left a post-it with his phone number and name, and underneath, "I'm counting on you." Needless to say, I never showed up. I took a photo of the post, had grabbed my cat, locked all of my doors, and stayed at my mom's house for about 5 days after that happened. I did phone the police to let them know he had been on my balcony again, but they never followed up with anything. Eventually, my boyfriend came and went back to my place together. Everything was as it should have been. I never saw Sam again. But a few weeks later, a lady that I'd never seen before was cleaning out his apartment. Maybe a month after that, new people moved in, and things have been normal ever since. I tried calling the police in the county jail to see if he was in lockup again, but no one was able to release information to me. I'm hoping that means he's there. If he did what the police said he did. So to Sam, I will say I'm not really sure what happened. But my biggest regret is not calling the police when I felt like I should have. And my gut and I hope to God I never see you when you get out.
So for the longest time in my teenage years, I earned a few bucks a week by doing babysitting work. It always made me giggle at how there are so many urban legends based around babysitting. The serial killer that stalks the unwitting teen, the call coming from inside the house. Pretty much every Halloween movie in some manner that seems to present babysitting as the vocation of those with a death wish, when in reality, the only thing likely to kill you is the boredom. Sure, you get a bratty kid and makes an evening a little more challenging, but you get a good one. And you're basically sat on the couch for hours on end watching tedious cable TV shows and counting the minutes until the parents get home. Saying that I did babysitting for one family that ended in a frankly terrifying experience that ended up in me never, ever sitting for them ever again. It only happened once, but sometimes once is enough. So I arrived at this big old house a few blocks away from my parents' house at around 6:31 Friday evening. The parents of the kid seemed incredibly charming, and the kid is one of the more adorable little tykes that I've had the good fortune of minding. We go over a brief list of rules, what the kid is and isn't allowed to eat, how much I'll be paid, and how long I'll be sitting for, and that sort of thing. Then the parents head out to whatever fancy party that they had been planning on attending. All goes well for a little while. The kid wouldn't eat their carrots, but when I pretended that they were delicious by taking little bites myself, they soon broke into a smile and pretty much demolished the little bowl of hummus that we were sharing. With a kid fed, I gave her a bath, tucked her in the bed, and that's that. It was honestly one of the easiest jobs I'd had. Right up until the sun started to go down. So once the kid's asleep, I head downstairs to order a pizza on the parents' dollar. Like I said, they were perfectly nice and polite when we first met, and it's not often that job comes with free food. Pizza arrives pretty quickly, and I even tipped the delivery guy a few dollars just to say thank you for being so fast. He's literally counting out the change in dollar bills when his head snaps to the side, like he's looking into the bushes at the side of the house. I asked him if everything's okay, peering out from the door to see what he's looking at. But there's nothing, just dark bushes. He said something along the lines of, say, "Guess I'm just tired. Mine's playing tricks on me." He laughs awkwardly, then walks back to his car while thanking me again for the tip. I didn't think anything of it. I mean, was probably just a cat or something, right? So again, back inside the eat, have a full-on carb overload and ended up just lying there on the couch watching TLC. There were these big bay windows in the family's TV room, and I had drawn the curtains earlier to block out the glare on the TV only, and drawn them all the way. And there was a slight crack in the curtains that allowed me to see into the dark front yard. At one point, my eyes were drawn to this little crack, and I could swear I saw a dark shape where street lights were previously visible. I sit up, focusing my eyes on the shape and wondering if it were my mind playing tricks on me this time. When it moved, wasn't going nuts. I had been looking at someone or something who was in turn looking at me through the big old windows. That's about when I started to freak out. I had been super chilled all evening, but now I was getting that distinctly paranoid feeling like someone was watching me. Someone who didn't exactly have the best of intentions. I ran around the house, making sure all the doors and windows are locked as a precaution, all before keeping their cordless phone as close as possible so that if it came to it, I could call the cops. I was sure I had seen someone, but the chances of them just vacating the area at the sight of flashing lights then returning later could be a huge possibility, and a terrifying one at that. So I decided to shoot my shot only when it would be absolutely necessary. Appearing to waste police time would not be doing me any favors. I suppose I'm just trying to explain why I didn't call the cops right away. I've had friends of mine that said that. They have just called 911 right then and there, but I wasn't 100% sure of anything right then. I'd seen a shape. Michael Myers pointing a knife at me. Life isn't black and white most of the time, I was thinking anyway. I've secured all the windows and doors, shoved the cordless phone into my hoodie's front pouch, and have even positioned the Little League bat near the couch so that I was sort of armed. So by that point, I started to feel relatively safe again. If there was some creeper lurking outside looking to prey on a teenage babysitter, they would get one heck of a rude awakening when I waved my bat at them and screamed that the cops are on the way. So I lie back on the couch, but naturally find myself unable to relax. I open the curtains back up so I can see if anyone is hanging around in the front yard, keeping my eyes on the windows every so often in between watching whatever social train wreck is on TLC. Nothing happens for a while, and I start to think it was all just in my head or something. Right about the time I get up to wander in the kitchen to grab a drink of water. As I'm in there, I get that intense feeling that I'm being watched. I turn to see that same dark shape in the kitchen window. Only this time, I rush into action. I hammer 911 in the phone, telling the dispatcher I need the cops to my address ASAP, that there's a home invasion in progress. I honestly don't know if it was the adrenaline or I was just sick of pervs thinking they can get away with stuff like that, but I just sort of charged after, screaming out that the cops were on their way. I ran into the TV room, grabbing the Little League bat, and just ran for the back door, which led out of the kitchen and into the backyard. What happened next is frankly astounding. As I ran it, the guy, baseball bat in hand, ready to bash his brains out right there in the yard. I recognized him instantly. It was a face I'd seen before, not long ago at all. It was the kid's dad. So long story short, the dad of the kid I had been babysitting had for whatever reason decided that you need to see what kind of babysitter I was to, apparently he drove his wife to whatever party they were headed to, turned back saying he'd forgotten something, then decided to watch me over the course of about an hour or two to see if I was worth the cash that they were spending. Obviously, since no crime was actually committed, there was no one to charge. The dad offered me a sincere apology. He even offered me double the cash just to finish the night out, but I refused. No amount of money could have persuaded me to stay, and needless to say, I was very selective with who I babysat after that.